Welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast, the show by and for those who love noise and those who make it. My name is Oscar Brummel. If you appreciate this podcast, please consider supporting it at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. Not only does this make the show possible, you also get access to bonus WCN TV content, and if you join the Maniac Circle, you get invited to the White Centipede Noise Discord server, and access to giveaways and surprises. White Centipede Noise is also a label and mail order. Visit whitecentipedenoise.com to see available label releases and a massive international distro. Today, my guest is an absolute legend of the seedy underbelly of American power electronics. Please welcome Eddie Giles, aka EJ of Final Solution. Hey, Eddie, how you doing?
Good.
Great to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'm going to just jump right in, I guess, by asking you to tell me about the origins of Final Solution and what was going on, in your life before then, and how did that all come about?
Okay, well, before Final Solution, I wanted to be actually a visual artist. I was really interested in conceptual art, especially conceptual artists from the 60s into the 70s. And I got really turned on to conceptual art at a institution called PS1 Museum in Long Island City, Queens, where I grew up. It was literally around the corner. And I used to play there was a sort of backyard area now that's all built up, but we used to play stickball there. And then I entered the building. I must have been about, 14, 15. I went in the building and I started to see art. There were no guards. There was pretty much like an open, raw space. And it was very much like an old public school, PS1, with the lockers and the gym and everything. So you've got this sort of decaying building, right, where there's paint peeling and just like, but then you've got these artists and they're very intense. And if you can catch one in their studio or working on something, you ask them, what are you doing? And you're like, oh, and it'll tell you. And I was just like, so I started to see an understanding between material things like wood and steel and paint. And, when you see them in the world, in the city, they're very structural, buildings and infrastructure, lights and everything. But if you take these stuff and you start tearing them into different pieces, you start reworking them, you can find there's almost like I want to go too far. There's almost a metaphysical thing within materials where if you keep digging and digging deeper into it, you'll find almost in an alchemy. You can tear apart more and more and find more things. And the more you find in these things, that could be a basis of a completely different way of looking at reality, the world, yourself, anything. It can be reflective or non-reflective. It could be objective or non-objective. What is an object and what is matter and everything. And I was just like blown out. This is really young. And I still had a very impressionable mind. So I was sort of like, I was young, and you're playing stickball and football, and then you start to get introduced to books like, I don't know, Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre, and The Stranger by Albert Camus, and Catcher in the Rye, all these sort of existential, struggle novels, right? So,
Right.
I'm reading into this, and I'm looking at that, and my stepfather was a film buff. He loved film, so he had a VCR very early on. We were watching, Kurosawa films and Hitchcock films. He's saying, look for this, look for that. So I'm looking at this, and the reality outside in the 70s, late 70s, was kind of rough in New York. I mean, you always hear about the tough kids and they're fighting each other. This really happened.
Right.
So it's just
Yeah.
all of that. Now, I should have went to art school. I had a really good friend who went to art school. His name is Harv. He was about 4 years older than me. And I'm still good friends with him. He'd go into the city and he'd come back with all of these new records. And he'd say, we go to his house. And you got to understand that his brother, I know I'm going into all of this, his brother would listen to Aerosmith and The Doors. Harv was bringing home Cabaret Voltaire and the first Roy Barton records and Throbbing Gristle and just rare singles. He would bring them home and we'd listen to them. And this made sense to me. This is this exactly is what the city sounds like. It's not some sort of rock fantasy. Now, I'll tell you when everything changed. Everything changed for me in 1979 when I remember it was a weeknight. And I said, I'm going to go to the city. I shouldn't have because I was still in school and I was still living with my folks. I went to the city. I got off at 14th Street and I hung out. There's a little park there, Union Square. And you look around and I saw some punk rockers, some punk rock looking people. So I said, I'm going to follow them. Okay, so I followed them and I got to a club called Max's Kansas City. Okay, and this is the true story. Back then, true, no one cared. No one checked it. I went to the door and there was a little sign, and I came up to the door guy. He looked like a biker, right? Almost like Charlie Manson. And I came up to him and I said, I'm young. I'm 14. I go, punk rock? And he just turns to me and goes, yeah, man, punk rock. Check it out. I said, okay. He says, yeah, good. So I went in there, and the band on stage was Suicide.
Whoa.
Suicide. Yeah, Suicide was on stage. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know anything about punk rock. I thought I was going to see a band like the Ramones or, a four-piece, because that's what I knew. I'd never seen any live music before this. And I go in there, and I see Alan Vega, I see Martin Rev. There's no band except for them. And I'm like, there's no bass, there's no drums, no guitars. And Alan Vega is just stunning because he just has this charisma. He's like an Elvis Presley from outer space, right? And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, that's it. The sound that they had was this sort of pulsating electronic, and it reminded me of the subways. Yep. It sounded like the subways, like a futuristic subway. And I said, that's the sound I hear in this city, in New York. That's the New York sound right there because it's. And I said, from that point on, I want to explore this. I want to see if I can connect, kind of like conceptual art with this sort of music, which I call punk. I didn't know the difference between one band or another, one genre or another.
Sure.
And punk too. So I can fast forward a little bit and say that as I got older and I was able to go out, because I was 15, I would go to punk shows, hardcore shows. At that point, I didn't go to a show after the Suicide for about 6-7 months. I didn't want to push my luck with my folks, so I just went to school and I bought records. I hung out in the neighborhood in Queens, and I just listened to my friend Harv's records. He would lend me records. He would give me records he didn't like. So I stayed there, did the right thing, and then I started going to clubs like A7 and CBGB's, and there was a record store called Rat Cage Records in a basement of a studio called 171A, where a lot of bands would rehearse and sometimes record there. And I just fell in with the New York City hardcore crowd right there. Cool. I knew about No Wave because that was also happening. So you've got the sort of Glenn Branca people here, Rise Catham, and all this fantastic music going on here, and I liked it. And then there was this punk, which was so direct and so immediate, and the songs were fast and they were easy, and it was fun because you go into a room about the size of your room and you just slam dance crazy. It was just crazy slam dancing, and it was just so much fun. It was just the fun of it. That's the thing, the fun of that energy. Yeah. So by 1984, I've already seen it. I'm almost like I've been there, done that. I had seen all the great bands. I'd seen Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, a lot of the British bands, most of the New York City hardcore bands, and all the sort of American bands. So like around 1984 or so, I wanted to go kind of back to what I was really interested in was, kind of conceptual or more, electronic. So while most people were trying to link hardcore and punk to kind of metal, because kind of metal got in there too, and it was a crossover. I was thinking if I could take the energy of hardcore and mix it with something that was electronic, hardcore electronic, but with no dance beat, more like that. And I figured then I started to listen to a lot more kind of heavier. By 84, 85, there was a lot of stuff going on in Italy and in Japan and other places. The New York, the American sort of like power electronic, it wasn't really up and running yet. There was a lot of experimental music, like, Sleep Chamber and, Hunting Lodge and stuff like that. And it was really great. But I'll be honest, like when I listen to stuff like that, it's really great for like chilling out and reading books. But, I'm a city guy and I want to be out in the city, I don't want to bore people. No boredom. Boredom was the enemy. I'm an excited kid. So, once I started hearing bands like the Grey Wolves and Ramla and White House and stuff like that, but if I could take that energy and mix it with sort of like a punk ethos, like a kind of like that maybe somewhere in the middle I can maybe create something. So I worked on my own on electronic stuff at home. I didn't even have a home studio. It was more like set up a few tape recorders. Tape recorders were cheap, and you could just get a few. Kind of like, so I bunched them together, and then I would record several tape recorders doing something and stuff like this. I wound up working with a few bands in this element. I bought a synthesizer, one of those store-bought synthesizers, and I put just a cheap effects pedal on it. And I worked with a few bands. They didn't get off the ground. They kind of played a little bit around the tri-state area, but nothing major. And there was a lot of infighting because there was a couple in the band, so it was a boyfriend, girlfriend, and they were constantly fighting, and we weren't getting a lot done, and, we had things planned. And so I said, I'm going to step away from this and start working on something else. And so around 1988, I started to see this guy in the city, in Manhattan, down on the Lower East Side, and he'd always be at the record stores, and he'd be at the bookstores, and he'd be at places that, I would frequent. I didn't catch his name, but I'd see him because there's something about New York City. If someone's wearing, a White Centipede shirt, and you're like, I'll remember that. And then I see this dude on the way. I'm like, I see you again. You're sort of like, you got to be a little bit of a spy. I'm like, who are you? And so this is, you gotta understand, no internet, no phones. You got to go to a payphone to talk to people. You had to like write letters and put them, mailboxes, all that stuff. So there was no of that. So one night I was at CBGB's and he's there. And I was talking about, I think the show was Rape Man, which was Steve Albini's band after Big Black. And I just said to somebody, friends of mine that I was out there, I said, I like Big Black way better. I was hanging out outside. I didn't even go in. I said, I don't really like Rape Man. I like Big Black because the drum machine and just the sound of them. And Greg said, me too. I'd rather listen to Big Black. So then I said, I've seen you around. I've seen you at the See Here bookstore. I've seen you at St. Mark's Sound buying records, cool records. So we introduced each other. And I said, do you like this? And he says, yes. I said, do you like that? He's like, yes. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. We exchanged numbers, and then we didn't see each other for a little while. So, after a while, one of us called one. And I said, we should meet and we should just at least talk because I have a few ideas about music. Mm-hmm. And then he said, okay. And then, we started to basically rehearse a lot. We did a few rehearsals and the rehearsals were cool. I brought some of the synths and he brought some of his gear and we combined them and we said, well, so we would do these sort of long sets. Yeah. But it was sort of directionless. It was just cool sounding, but it was directionless. And it was good for what it was. And then I said, well, maybe someone should sing. And then, I tried setting up the table with the mic. So I'm singing and I'm playing synths and samplers and I'm singing. And then we would take turns. And then one rehearsal, he said, why don't you just sing? And I'll just handle all the rest. And I go, so you want me out in front, like a front man? He says, yeah, why don't you do that? And I said, okay, I could try that. And I went out there, it's a practice room. I said, and I was singing, and he just did all the synths. And I said, you know what? That's good. That's good. And then we started to reduce our gear because you got and said I had a carload of stuff. It takes a half an hour to set up all the gear. And I said to myself, less is more. And I said, honestly, I started to think about this, I said, when I was in a band prior, one of the biggest, best instruments was the van itself. The van was the most important thing. Yeah. No van, no band. So I said, I don't have a van. We should be mobile. So the synths became smaller and our setup became smaller and easier. Smaller and easier. So I wanted to be like a subway band. So you can jump on the subway, go and play and come home. You can jump on an Amtrak train, go and play. As long as the venue or the space has a PA system and a mixer, mixing board, we're good. We just set up, plug in, play, and go. And that was the template. That was what I wanted to do. And still having in mind this whole idea of being aggressive and exciting. Yeah. I'm going to confess that as we went on, besides a lot of great hardcore bands that were kind of the model, I'll be honest with you, I really wanted to model Final Solution, hold me on, as AC/DC. Because I really liked early AC/DC. I really liked AC/DC. I thought that the first 4 or 5 AC/DC records with Bon Scott just spoke to me, just the energy of the music. And when I never saw them with Bon Scott, but when I saw videos of them, just the energy coming off the stage, the same thing I felt about the Ramones, the Black Flag, and I'm like, that's the energy I want. When we hit the stage, I wanted to be like a nuclear bomb going off, boom, just keep going and going and going. And a lot of people find that in that aggression in rock music or metal or speed metal or grind, but I wanted to do it electronically. Yeah. And, just keep it as simple as possible, And then we were thinking about adding a third member.
Barstool Mountain 3 CD, out now on Absurd Exposition. This Alter of Flies alter ego presents a deep dive into fractured reservoirs of textural discourse, whiffs of smudge sophistication, crusted complexity, substance over style. Available from absurdexposition.bandcamp.com or screamandwrithe.com.
This episode of White Centipede Noise Podcast is brought to you by Oxen Records. Now available on Oxen Records, Dressing, From the Body to the Door CD. Dublin-based artist Kevin Kerwin, Sounds in the Vein of Hands 2. Purgist, Heatsink CD. Oral Atmospherics, Waterlogged Drones, and Weather-Beaten Pulsations. Other titles still available, Scum and Unsustainable Social Condition, Necessary Downfall CD. Leah P., Surviving the Familiar CD. Systemic Sewage and Unsustainable Social Condition, All Available Weaponry CD. Available at oxenrecords.bigcartel.com.
And the third member was Chris. But, you know, Chris had just moved from Connecticut to New York. And I knew him he was just an acquaintance. And when I approached him about it, he said, well, I didn't, he's kind of a gruff guy. He's a great guy, but he was very gruff. And he's like, I didn't move to New York to join a band. I said, I did that already in Connecticut. It didn't get me anywhere. I go, no, this is different from a band. This is different. I go, what is it like? We go, oh, well, it's just you played a synth. He goes, I'm not a synth player. He goes, I'm a bass player. And I go, just play the low notes. And now you're the bass player. So we brought him in once, and we were kind of showing him what we were doing, and he looked really bored. Mm-hmm. And I was like, losing him. So we set the synth up, and I go, just go behind there, hit the lowest notes, sustain notes. Just keep your finger on the note. That's all, and maybe move it up if you feel, inspired. And our first rehearsal together, I brought a big bottle of Absolute Vodka. That's where I got the name from.
Yeah.
And slugs. Everybody took slugs. We got up there on the vodka, and we just blasted. We just put everything on 10 and did like an hour's worth of like screaming and synth. And I said, we're ready. This is it.
Yeah.
We're going to take this to the stage now.
Wow. What year was this?
I'd say 89, 90. 89 going into 90. So I had already worked with Greg Scott from 88 into 89. And then 89 to 90, when Chris moved to New York to Brooklyn, I'm not sure exactly what year he moved. It was like 89, 90, but we cut our first demo, the 4-song demo, in 90.
Yeah.
So it was around 1990. And I can't see it's a little foggy. I can't remember if we actually played our first show before or after we released a demo. And when we say demo, it was truly a demo. We wanted to just give it out to people to try to get shows. Because I was still under the same idea that, back in the 80s, you went to whatever, a print shop, Kinko's now, and then you would get your stuff, your flyers or whatever, and a little press kit together. It was press kits. They're so cute, right? Put them in an envelope, or you have them, folded up, and and then you have the demo in there with the 4 songs, and then you hand them over to booking agents and fans, and you hope they call you. And it was just cute because it's like a lot of bands did that. This is before the internet. There was no www nothing, right? So I would just hand this stuff out and see. So that's really what the demo was supposed to be, and try to get people interested and record labels interested in what we were doing. Because I had this vision that we were going to be on, I don't know, Touch and Go Records or something really cool, independent,
Yeah.
label that would understand what we're doing.
Yeah.
And then, I kind of got delusional because I thought that I honestly thought that Final Solution were going to be as big as any other band. And
Sure.
I can get into how, I really felt that all these other bands in New York City, a lot of them were great, but they were getting a lot of attention and publicity. And I didn't see it in the music. I'm like, this is mediocre music, but there's, they're fawning over these bands. And I'm like saying, I don't get it.
Yeah.
At the same time, I got really not upset, but okay, I understand the popularity of hip hop and rap music. Okay. It's got a beat. You can sing along with it. People, it's sort of like a big crowd, lots of crowds.
Yeah.
So, but it was there was an unbelievable, phenomenal amount of money, record company money and other money being invested into rap music and hardcore music. Yeah. I mean, rap and hip hop. And I really wanted to know why other forms of music were not getting the same attention, the same props, the same shows. And I said, if we can just get a break here, we could bring other power electronic band this to a bigger stage. I really thought we were playing in front of hundreds and thousands of people. The more the merrier. And Chris always put me put me back on the ground. He goes, "Are you crazy? Are you crazy? The subject matter that we're in, the sound that we're not going to get." He goes, "I don't want to, burst your bubble or, your little dream here, but we're not going to do anything like that." He goes, besides, I didn't join this band to be a rock star.
Yeah.
And we kind of, I became delusional and he always would put me there. And Greg would always be neutral. He'd be like, well, maybe if we can get bigger, that's fine. But we're going to be on MTV. I go, yes, we can be on MTV. At the same time, I used to see on talk shows like Geraldo Rivera and Jerry Springer, they'd always have people like, I don't know, Gigi Allen, right?
Right.
Or even Jello Biafra. They were like the bad guys. Okay, so you've got
right.
Oh, what's wrong here? And at that same time, Tipper Gore's, parental discretionary labels on record, So I said, we can be the bad guys. We can be the worst because we bring the total underground, the sleazy sort of films, the Richard Kern. We'll bring this up and we'll kind of promote this and say we're the worst of the worst, and let's play the bad guys like you would see in wrestling. So everyone likes bad guy because he just does insane things like bites heads and throws people out of. I said, let's be that guy. Let's not be the hero. Let's be the villain. And I tried my best. Believe me, I tried my best to get ourselves on TV any way possible. We didn't make it.
Well, what scene of music were you addressing here, with the press kits and with this wish and this attention? Because was it the hardcore scene? Was it the rock and roll scene? Was there already a noise power electronics kind of underground? Because at least from my experience, I listen to noise all the time, and to me it's normal. But usually when I bring something that I think is at least digestible or cool to someone else who's not exposed to this genre, after 3 seconds they're like, what in the fuck is this? Turn it off. It makes no sense. Stop. Were you pitching this to people who had some sort of knowledge of this as an art form or as a genre, or was it people who were completely unfamiliar with it?
Both. Okay. I figure,
Okay.
we were already familiar with certain fanzines and we were familiar with certain, I guess, experimental artists. And when we got shows, a lot of the shows we just basically wanted to play. So we didn't play with any sort of noise act at all. We would just play with sort of, maybe kind of underground bands, maybe kind of no wave-ish type of bands. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until Mark Solitroff moved to New York City from Chicago that we really felt that, we can build a scene. And this is really something Greg Scott or visioning. While I'm having delusions that we're going to be on TV and have our own TV show, Greg being more of a state of mind, he just basically so that we can develop a scene here, which means if you play and people enjoy what they do, maybe we can inspire them and even tell them this is entry-level music. You can go to a store now, go to a pawn shop, look for a synth. If it makes cool sounds, bring it home. Start writing lyrics. You don't even need lyrics. Just figure out things you don't like and talk about that. That's the thing I like. I want music to be as offensive as possible. And I want people to be like, okay, I'm not here to play nice music. You want nice music? There's a whole world of music out there you can play. My mom used to take me to Carnegie Hall when I was a young boy. I watched classical music, so I love that stuff. When I'm at peace at my home, I listen to lots of mellow, classical music, stuff like that. I love it. But I didn't come from a musical family. I came from a family that said, you're 16 years old, go take the Department of Sanitation test. So I was geared to be a city worker, work with your hands, not with your head, and 20 years in a pension, and you're good. And that was the dream of a lot of working class people. Get a job at the city, work your ass off, 20 years in a pension, and then you can do what you want. You'd probably be in your 40s, and then you can go do whatever you want because you're getting steady money from a pension. As we all know, it didn't really work out that way, and pensions aren't, they're not like the golden ticket to like paradise. It's just you get a little bit of money from doing your work. But I was totally geared to be, meanwhile, my friend Harv was saying you should go to art school. And other people said, there was another opportunity. I could have went to John Jay School of Criminal College and become some sort of criminologist or something. Because it's sort of like all these other things like forensic psychology and, crime and all the stuff that would have these sort of like interests. So if you're interested in crime and serial killers and mass, killers, why don't you become a criminologist? Maybe, figure out why they do this, how they do, and all this other stuff. And it sounded fascinating. I'm like, I really should. But of course, the lure of the nightlife, the lure of the city, the lure of like, you don't need that. Just get your GED and then, wing it. I always figured in New York, there's like this sort of like the myth of meritocracy that if, you're Johnny on the spot and people like you, they're going to elevate you to some great status. And it really doesn't work that way. Nah.
Right. So what was the audience like at these Final Solution shows? What was their response to it and how did they receive it? And what are some memorable responses?
Okay, so we always, kind of invited friends, you just invite friends. And a lot of friends would show up and they were curious. And I think they saw it as sort of amusing, I think. A lot of them saw it as amusing. And then there were people that showed up and kind of liked it as it is. And I would say the majority of people early on didn't like it at all. So you had a mixture of friends saying, yeah, that was great, whatever, trying to support you. And then you had people that were kind of curious about it that Greg would usually talk to. And then you had people that just said, I hate this. And usually it was the club owners and the managers and the bartenders and even the sound people. So, the bouncers. So I knew the strategy was basically make friends with the bouncers and the sound person first, buy them drinks, pal with them, because once this starts happening, they're going to try to shut you off. And we've been shut off several times. Yeah, they didn't like a lot of my material. The material was Final.
Yeah. What was your lifestyle like at this time? Like, on a personal level?
Well, I was working. I mean, I had a variety of several jobs. When I met Greg, I was still working, I think, at Strand Bookstore. I think I was working there.
Okay.
I had worked on and off for about 9 years at PS1. I worked at PS1 on the crew, like assembling, some of the art and breaking down and setting up and all that. So I worked there, and it was great, And then I got a job. I got a few other jobs, and then when Chris came to town, he said, you should really come down and maybe drive the horse and carriages. So he drove a horse and carriage, a handsome carriage in Central Park. And he said, it's great money. And I'd always run into him because at that time I was working at an adult bookstore that had live sex shows upstairs. And my girlfriend worked upstairs doing live sex with these other girls. And I was downstairs as a cashier, and you give out tokens and they go in the booths. And it was a cool job for a while. But then, you know, it didn't pay as much as, like, I'd see Chris literally going up 8th Avenue, and he'd just bring out a stack of money. He'd be like, look how much I made. You can go down there, and I'm like, is it cash money? He says, yeah, it's all cash money. You just go, and you just, like, you know, you tell people about buildings and, you know, the park and a little bit, and they just, you know, and I'm like, okay. And then I did that. I said, okay, I'm going to leave the bookstore and go and work at the Horse and Carriages. So I went over there. So work had a lot to do with it. Now, Greg worked in Staten Island, and he worked, I don't know his total title or status. I want to say he was an orderly. He might have even been a nurse, but he worked at a psychiatric ward at a hospital in Staten Island. And he would tell us stories about, you know, some of the situations that were going on there, and it was pretty hairy, you know. Yeah. So we always had, like, one thing I would say New Yorkers, they love to talk about their work. So, like, you would get off work and then you just talk about work because that's what you just experienced for 8 or 9 hours. So
yeah,
when we got together, we would always talk a lot about work, you know. I was living with my girlfriend at the time, which was still in the neighborhood in Queens, so I used my old room as a storage space for all sorts of things, books, videos, collections. I didn't want the collection in the apartment. It was small, so I would just have stuff. And this was just building since, like, I was, you know, just preteen, just cool stuff that I had. So I had a room full of stuff. And, you know, I would go there and just put stuff in there. And eventually it became like the vault for Final Solution reel-to-reel. So back in the day, we actually used reel-to-reel tape, Ampex and stuff. And so, like, after a while, they collect, and I said, okay, I'll put them in the closet in my, you know, room at my parents' house. And I lost all that, by the way. Okay. So I can get into that and how that all happened too.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened to that? Because I mean, maybe that's is that related to? Because I mean, you've had releases that came out in those early '90s. You know, you guys were pretty active. I think like 90 to 92-ish. I think, or what is the time span that you guys were really active?
I would say we really got up and running about 89. We figured out what we wanted to do. The first year of that, before that, Greg and I would come together and rehearse. We never played live. We never know. We figured we would kind of record our sets, and it would be, you know, set as release. You know, that was sort of the very simple project, the simple idea. You know, a simple plan to do that. But then when we figured out that we wanted to go much more harsher and much more extreme and move away from a sort of, I don't want to say arty sound, but more of a, get away from the sort of, like, I didn't want to bore people. So we would listen back to some of the tapes, and it was great. But I said, you know, we live in a fast world. I don't know about other people. I love industrial music. I love this. But honestly, as you know, as you get busier, it's really hard to sit through a half an hour's worth of any music. I would just put singles or 7 inches punk, 2 minutes, then you're out the door. Because I don't have time to listen to a half an hour sheet of sidelong of, like, MB. I love it. Or you know, something long. And I understand the music needs time to develop and get in there and the zones and everything. But I'm like saying, things are happening quick, and I just put a record on, boom. Yeah. So when I listened to the early tapes of the rehearsals, I said they're great, but we need to cut down. We need to sharp. Once I started singing, we figured that we can create songs. Like, we would sing the same over and over again and then create a song. So about 90, we were up and running full scale as Final Solution. We had chosen a name, and we chosen a sound and direction, and then we stayed with that format.
Yeah. And And tell me about the name Final Solution, and tell me about a little about the content of the, you kind of alluded to the fact that you liked, you wanted to be a bad guy. You wanted to bring this element to music. But can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I was still under the guise that, you want to be a little bit more recognized and shocking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like you have like bands names like the Sex Pistols and everything, or, something that kind of stands out. So I was reading a book at that point called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Mm-hmm. And I was just reading it, and it just name popped out. I was reading about that in the section of this, the Final Solution. And I already knew that term was used for, I guess it was a promotion company in the UK that had booked a lot of shows like SPK or Cabaret Voltaire or Throbbing Gristle. Okay. So there was like Final Solution Presents, and that was in the UK. So I understood that. And there was a band from the 60s. There was a garage band called Final Solution, because I knew a little bit about like kind of the underground 60s garage rock. But I just, the Final Solution, it stands out. You can go either way with it. It had really no connotation to anything sort of like drastically political. It basically meant it was the end of the line for stuff. It's like, cut the bullshit. Yeah. Final Solution. And ultimately, it was sort of like the ultimate final solution is life and death. I mean, how do you live? Right. How do you want to die? And all these other sort of elements. So I didn't mind if it seemed offensive. It seemed offensive enough if people knew what the term meant to use that. Now, we didn't go down that any direction because, first of all, I mean, you would have a really, really hard life anywhere if you were like that extreme and racist or anti whatever. Especially in New York City, people will call you out and, you wouldn't have a very good life. So it had nothing to do with that. But I kind of liked the idea that people would think that about us and bring even more animosity, that they want to kill or harm or deny someone something, what they don't even know who we are or what we're doing. So I kind of like that. I like the antagonism. So I was a very antagonistic person. I wanted to get underneath people's skin. Yeah. I mean, and I started to think like people like, honestly, like I really like people like, I don't know, Jello Biafra, because Jello Biafra sort of incited this sort of think before you act. And if you act, remember that you're acting, hopefully you're thinking about what you're doing before you actually act. But when you get a lot of people in a room and they're very excited, I mean, one of the songs, Nazi Punks Fuck Off, I think was an answer to like a lot of the aggression that was going on in the punk scene, and how people thought that it was cool to be, you couldn't even call it fascist. It was basically a sort of bully violence kind of like, people were more fighting than slam dancing. And it was really dicey, especially in San Francisco, LA, so like he basically said Nazi punks fuck off, because basically why would you want to be even more controlled by a larger system, whether it be political or social? Why would you even want to have less freedom than more? Right. Because you really can't, I don't want to get too deep into it, but like, to me, fascism is basically those who take away. They don't add to you, like they kind of take away. And it's their sense of like, but like this is New York City. And like, you got to be a little bit of a nut to think that, that is going to like get you anywhere, and at that point too, in the city, there was a lot of people. See, one of the things that really aggravated me was like in New York City, there's a lot of free speech. Everyone says, oh, my free speech. I mean, there's people literally on the streets of New York with their tables and their pamphlets calling other people, I'll say it, white devils. Yeah. They're like the 5% is. I would listen to like their sermons or whatever they wrote on the streets, usually around Times Square, and they would just set up their things. So everyone sort of like showed up, and everyone was on their little stump talking about whatever. And I after a while, it got really stifling. It got super stifling. I'm like, why is it everybody's talking about what they want, but they really can't achieve this? So basically, they're angry because not everybody is going to go for their their agenda. So
Sure.
I just said, I'm really upset with this because I couldn't leave the house and go to New York City without someone trying to convince me that somehow if I didn't go along with them, I'm the problem. And I'm like, I'm just some guy from Queens. I don't really care what you do. What you do is your business. Very interesting. I'll take a pamphlet, I'll read a book or whatever. But as far as like, you can't convince me that your morals or your ethics are better than anyone else's. Because to me, they're kind of random, And as we see in this day and age in 2022, just how out of control things have become as far as like climate in America, as politics and also socially, But I never wanted to be a political band, whether it be right or left. So, I enjoy Crass just as much as I enjoy Screwdriver because it's music. And if it's got a beat and I like it, I enjoy the song because it's got heart. Basically, that's another thing I want to talk about is that, I believe that a lot of the power electronic stuff, the harsh noise stuff, if you really listen to it, some of it has a lot of heart to it. Heart.
Yeah.
Soul.
Describe that. What does that mean to you?
Okay, well, when you have one of the reasons why I wanted to do a band like this is because it had a singer. So you would at least, there would be some sort of narration. There would be a narrative. I don't mind, like I said, long pieces of noise or very interesting stuff and, the harsh stuff. But I always went back to the sort of, once again, punk rock had this sort of immediacy. And if you hear a song over and over again, then you can catch on to it and that now you got it. So, I'm sorry, I wanted to answer the question correctly. So what was the question?
Well, I guess, tell me about what heart means to you. Cause I'm very interested in that. Like when music has heart, what does that mean?
Well, it affects you. You feel it, it comes from a place of maybe experience. It comes from a place of, maybe you're going to tell a story. Are you going to tell a story? I know that a lot of this sort of music doesn't lend itself to sympathy or sentimentality or, we're going to tell this sort of story about life. And, that's the thing I really look for in music, in all forms of music. But, I would say that a lot of the power electronics music, I wouldn't say a lot of it, but some of it has lots of soul and some of it, it's just sort of, it's all confrontational without much, I'm waiting for some more. So, and I just tried to put my heart and soul into this thing. At the same time, I talked to Greg a lot about this, is that I didn't want to make this personal. So a lot of the music Final Solution did, I was kind of like, I'm singing it, I'm feeling it. And there's this weird thing, like I really want to get into some sort of deeper, almost personalized. But the problem with that is that if you start talking about stuff that's very personal to you or very personalized songs, then it becomes sort of the songwriter's point of view. And since there's three people in the band, I figure, okay, kind of write anthems, like songs that everyone wants to sing and everyone wants to hear, more than, some sort of like very introspective sort of like, song. But I really wanted to get to some very introspective songs. But then, Chris would always joke and say, what are you turning into? Bob Dylan, Jim Croce. Yeah. I mean, you're going to start pulling out a, acoustic guitar. Are you Death in June? I mean, what are you doing here? And he said, just give them the hard stuff all the time. And we did that. And just before the band fell apart, I was writing, and I always write lyrics. So I wrote a lot of lyrics that were more introspective about, very personal things. I felt that what I was doing was personal, but I realized, in retrospect, when I listened back to my music, that it seriously lacked the sort of depth. Another thing too is that I'll say it, I didn't have much faith in the audience. I really thought the audience they showed up, they're drinking beer, it's a nightclub. They don't want to hear someone's deep personal song. They just want to rock and roll. So I just gave them these sort of anthems that they could sort of latch onto, Once again, the sort of AC/DC Highway to Hell. Yeah, Highway to Hell. Like, okay. And but you can sing along with it. You know the song, it's familiar. And that's what I wanted to build on. The same with the Ramones, it was all these songs that everyone knows. When they hear the beat, I know that song immediately. So I figured that's the immediate way to get to people. If I'm singing this song with complex lyrics about almost like a Nick Cave sort of very introspective, very poetic, lots of prose. He's taking from great, classic poets and writers here and working it in there. I didn't think that was going to work. I didn't, so I didn't do it. Yeah.
Well, and what was people's reaction to? What was people's reaction to the content, though? I mean, and also, where did the content come from? Because I mean, there's punk, there's aggressive music, which is well established, but it's usually more abstract. It's usually more also kind of, I guess I would say, egalitarian in some aspect, even if it's misanthropic. But then there's power electronics, like you guys do. I mean, the dedicated to Jeffrey Dahmer, the very sadistic, very in-your-face content, not presented in kind of not really presented in a critical way, but presented in a very shocking, confrontational way, as if it's very serious. What was the response like that at that time to people who maybe didn't have experience with art that used that as a technique?
Once again, I overestimated the audience. I figured that if everyone is going to these bookstores and everyone's going to see movies like Natural Born Killers, Quentin Tarantino type movies, John Woo, stuff like that, that they were looking for some sort of they were trying to live vicariously through violence or some sort of excitement of the cinema, or you can find it in books. But I didn't need that, because all I needed to do in New York City is go right out my front door, and there it was. I mean, they probably cleaned up these areas now, but I lived in areas that had drug dealers on corners, broken bottles everywhere, burned out apartments. And, when you start to see this every day, it starts to linger in your mind. So I often say that when you listen to your music or you read your books, that's wonderful. But the moment you leave your front door, the moment you go outside, all bets are off. Especially in cities like New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, where some person could just come in there and take you right out like that because of nothing. Or you bump somebody and they shoot you. It's serious. I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. It's really crazy. It's gotten worse since the early 90s. In the 80s, I'm not going to blame anybody, but you had a city that was pretty much out of control, okay? And you can always easily blame the mayor or the chief of police or those in charge. But the city itself, the neighborhoods themselves are under siege with drugs and violence everywhere, Lower East Side. And then there were these other areas that were much more gentrified, like Soho and Tribeca, where there was a lot less crime. There was always crime, but so you start to see that there's this sort of you're living in a world of several different environments. One is you can go to work and then you get on the subway and then, there's some element in the subway. So this is I really tried to reflect with Jeff, songs like that, and other songs, the anger, the frustration that a lot of people had. So then it becomes almost like a moral thing. Am I on the side of righteousness and goodness, or am I on the side of evil, or am I just a news reporter, a journalist just saying, this is what I'm seeing in the world. Yeah. And I was, we didn't want to get too, deep into this stuff, because then it becomes a sort of intellectual sort of chit chat about, what art is and what music is and society and everything. But basically, we just wanted to go out there and give people the heaviest and hardest stuff possible, because it's going on in clubs, and it's going on in venues like that. So I always said, I always thought industrial records should be sold at hardware stores.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's sort of like if you really want to stay away from music and you really want to do something different, you would put your records. So the closest thing you can get into is maybe is an art gallery. You have your records sold in art galleries or very specialized stores and everything like that. But like, you know, once again, another thing that it is, the thing about it is that the lowest and cheapest, the best. So I really, we as Final Solution wanted to present ourselves with the most sort of minimalized. We kind of like used restrictions on our sound. And, you know, it's amazing what just 2 analog synths and microphones can do. We didn't add to that at all. Because when we first started off, we had lots of equipment. And then I said, this isn't going to work. So we just pared it down. So going forward, stuff like harsh noise wall, you know, and even more extreme, like minimal stuff, it makes sense to me. You know, I take it in small doses, but the thing is that I completely understand it and I like it for what it is, you know.
Yeah.
And it veers away from there's a sort of like, I really got annoyed with sort of like pseudo academic or pseudo compositional or pseudo scientific jargon. People are trying to say, well, this is, you know, and at the same time, I do like conceptual art, but at the same time, I say there's enough of that already. I want something that like front pages of the Times or the Post where it's just shocking, you know, so the shock appeal of things. So that's the sort of thing like Jeffrey Dahmer and these very angry, aggressive songs. They're more like headlines that smack you in the face rather than, you know, a 500-page philosophical book that explains things. But at the end of the day, when you go out the front door, you might get clobbered by somebody. So the book can't help you.
Can you go back now and kind of pick up the kind of the story of Final Solution, like where you guys were at? You guys were doing shows. You know, you mentioned Mark Saltroff coming to New York City, and kind of that progression and what happened with the band.
Well, you know, meeting Mark, you know, was a real explosion for us. I mean, you know, he understood what we were doing. We became fast friends. He moved to New York City. And, you know, I mean, Greg and I felt that, you know, things were really, really picking up. We were so excited to work with Mark because we adored Intrinsic Action and the AWB label. And we really thought, okay, you know, this is like everything we ever asked for as far as like a friend, a label, an ally in New York City. And we started to play out. And I really, really thought and hoped with Greg that, you know, we could basically build a scene there, you know. And things were going well until the drugs. I was taking a lot of drugs, and my ego started to take off. I thought that I was the king of the fucking universe, and nothing can stop us. And I just had this sort of mentality that I can do whatever I want at any time.
Sure.
And it was terrible. I mean, like, I look back and I'm like very, very, you know, but I have to tell the truth about myself is that I was not a nice person. I took advantage of a lot of people. I wasn't committed to truth. I'd lie. I'd do anything I could, lie, cheat, steal to get ahead because I didn't care. And my character, the character that I am, the person that I am, started to really depreciate. I was really mean to my parents. I was cruel, uncaring, self-centered, selfish, arrogant, narcissistic. All of those things came in. And later on, all those things bit me in the ass big time. And I learned from them. And we can talk about that too. But, you know, when Mark came to town, like, it sparked this energy that we were going to go to the top. I don't know what the top means, but we were going to go somewhere. Yeah. And these sort of lofty ideas of being an artist we're being put to the side where we're going to be a force to reckon with. We're going to be just like this thing, okay? And take no prisoners, because I didn't care. So the more that fed me, the more extreme the music and the content became. So the sentimentality I was talking about, the heart and soul, was put to the side so I could write anthems. I wanted to write songs that people can directly relate to and then whatever, act upon. I don't know how people can act upon power electronics unless, you're going to go on a killing spree or whatever, attack people. I don't know. Aggression. But the thing is that, like, the more the merrier. When I started to see how much aggression was at hardcore shows, I mean, I didn't like the fighting, but I did like the aggression. But if, like, people, like, they always, like, once again, in New York City, people wanted change. They want to change. They want to change this, they want to change that, gentrification, blah, blah, blah. And I said, if you want real change, just wipe it all out. Just like my mentality was just destroy it all. And so, like, they got that sort of punk mentality of, like, the Sex Pistols, destroy. But as you can see, the Sex Pistols were sort of like a put on. It's like they can say destroy as much as they want, but after the show, they're counting how much money they made. So, it was like, okay, so you get it. So I didn't want to go down that road. I wanted to be as sincere as possible. And sincerity has a lot of, how sincere do you want to be? So, like, how far do you take things? How far do you take things? Well, I can use a model. Look at G.G. Allen. Call it the G.G. Allen syndrome. Is basically, if you're going to be that extreme, and every night you're going to break bottles over your head, you're going to roll in shit, you're going to... the thing is that you can only do that for so long. And if you stop doing that, people are going to say, forget it. I'm here to see him tear shit apart. So the moment you stop doing that, you've painted yourself in a corner. Right. So the more radical you become, the more you have to, like, live up to that. If you don't live up to it, people are going to say they're done and move on to something else. Yeah. So how do you keep an audience without killing yourself? I don't know. The thing is that if you can feel the energy of the room, and that energy is attention, and it's kind of negative, but it's also positive, because people are into music, but the stuff you're saying is so negative and so antisocial. It kind of, here's the ironic thing. As much as this music is the most extreme with the graphics and the lyrics and the content, it actually binds people. It bonds them. Right. They make real friends. They make real connections. I have my friends. And, like, the most ironic thing is that it seems so extreme and so confrontational. It actually brings people together. Yeah, true. Just like any other music. I know there's a lot of people that are straight up loners or introverts, and they don't get along, or they have, social awkwardness or whatever. And I really feel that this music, in a way, is therapeutic, because at least it channels some of that. I feel alienated. I feel isolated, and say, you know what? You're not alone. And a lot of people feel that they don't fit in. They can't fit in. They won't fit in. Yeah. I live in Los Angeles now, and I would say that where I live is suburbia. Like, I have separate houses and a quiet street, and, lawns and everything. I didn't come from that. I come from streets. I come from New York City, concrete. So this is like paradise to me. And the thing is sort of like, even here, only a few blocks away, there's straight up gangs. You can hear the guns at night, and there's takeovers where they turn the cars around and everything. And it's sort of like, okay, so, like, the danger is always lurking. Even though you see palm tree sunshine, there's always that element, So when Mark came to town, he told me a lot about Chicago, and how, like, Chicago had some serious situations in the city, very similar to New York City. Lots of crime, lots of violence. And I really hate to say, it was those people doing this and those people doing that. But after a while, I mean, you start to see in your eyes that it's neither them, no, it's not these sort of people or that sort of people. It's just people in general. When you get a lot of people together, there's going to be sparks. There's going to be schism. There's going to be people just don't fit. And I see it more and more. I mean, now that we have cameras on everything, on phones, I see a lot of people just flipping out, bugging out on subways, on street corners. Some woman, a doctor just got hit in the face by some homeless dude in Pasadena. You see this every day on the news because that's the local news, right? And I'm saying to myself, now that we have cameras and surveillance cameras, especially after 9/11 and everything, now that you see all this, you know, it kind of like, maybe there's a bias in me, but I said, this shit was happening all the time. Everyone knew it, but no one talked about it except maybe the newspapers, that something horrible was happening, and then the news would take care of it. But I said, I see it all the time. I see it happening shit all the time. Pickpockets, muggings, people screaming, people jumping on the track, all sorts of things. And then you think, is this normalized? Is this the normalization of society? We talked about this a lot, you know, Greg and I and Mark. You know, we talked about this, and this became like, you know, he became our, I wouldn't say our mentor, but I really wanted to model what we were doing, sort of like what Intrinsic Action were doing. You know, like, they seemed very professional. Mark had a very professional, just like Sam, had a very professional way of approaching music, getting things done, and putting it into some sort of like, you know, we weren't just some raw dogs off the street. Because we came into this like, I really didn't know. I had been around the punk and hardcore scene for years, but I still didn't know how to manage a band. I still don't know how to book shows. Otherwise, maybe I would have played last night. I don't know. But the thing is that I don't know how to book shows. I have a social awkwardness. I don't know how to connect to people. So if I put something in front of you, you look at this, I'll be behind it. That could be the front. So Mark showed us, and Greg already knew a little bit more than I did because I guess I was just out of control, how to do it professionally, how to do it correctly. You know, get your stuff together, book the show, do your thing. Don't go too, you know, don't insult the audience. Don't incite the audience to violence. Don't, you know, just let it go. And then focus on the best performance you can do. Performance. So again, you've got this sort of mentality that, am I an artist or am I an entertainer? And that's another thing. Am I entertaining you? Am I an entertaining guy? If I was a comic, would you have walked out by now? Because I'm not hitting any buttons with you. I'm not. You know. So that's the thing. I have this like I put this pressure on myself that I gotta perform and I gotta entertain these people. If I'm not gonna entertain them, I'm going to offend them. I'm going to incite them. So you can read an audience, and that's what I really liked about being on stage is that you can read an audience and say, okay, go for it, pull back, stuff like that. But don't fake it. Don't fake it, you know? Yeah. No.
And, you know, you mentioned when things started kind of getting out of control for you and going in a destructive direction, your attitude and behavior was, do you think that's something that you can recognize in yourself before kind of going down this path and getting into drugs and things like that? Was that something you have identified like in you before then, or do you think it was something that was really kind of brought out or caused by certain external factors of the time?
I have to be honest. I think that I have an addictive personality. I think that I obsess over things. I think that when I was young, I was confused between anger, depression, and a need to be happy. And happiness came from very simple things, which was just like being a kid. As I grew up and I started to live in the grown-up world, I had a lot of trouble with it. And maybe it was because I was listening to too many punk records, or I didn't want to conform, or I didn't want to grow up, or whatever. But, you know, once I was introduced to cocaine at a young age at a club. I loved it. And then more cocaine, and then heroin, and then crack. Me, a crackhead. Even though I'm talking shit about the people selling crack on the corner, I'm a customer. So I'm talking out of the side of my neck. I'm a hypocrite. I lived with this, and I started to say, okay. I thought that I can handle a band, a relationship with my girlfriend, a relationship with my family, and work in this big, big circle on drugs, taking drugs and playing Mr. Smooth on top of everybody. Hey,
Right.
and playing this game. And I did it for a while until the drugs really took over, and it just completely destroyed me after a while.
Sure.
It's just like, and, I went through a lot of things, and I think, okay, so I don't want to get too deep into other people's lives, but, Chris and I did drugs a lot. We did drugs all the time, actually, and I had a 3-bag-a-day habit for heroin, and then had a lot of crack and everything. Greg did not do any drugs at all. He didn't.
Okay.
We would drink when we played live. We would drink, and he loved he loved to get a little, get out there a little bit with his drinking, but he was never out of control.
Yeah.
And I really think he frowned upon the drug use. Yet he never said anything about it because he didn't want to offend me. He didn't want to upset me. And he can see that if someone is trying to press me down, repress me, that I might get a little bit, angry. Yeah. So he never said anything. Plus, he worked on a psych ward. He worked on a psych ward where in Staten Island, where in psychiatric wards, they bring people that are coming down off of serious drugs to psych wards to chill them out and sedate them and
right,
give them room to sit in. So he saw a lot of drug abuse, the end factor of drug abuse. He didn't need to see people snorting cocaine and heroin like we did backstage, but he saw the end result, which is just basically ruined people, mentally ill people, just like really just need a lot of help. The drugs weren't working. And the drugs had a lot to do with, basically the drugs tore apart Bowel Solution, It wasn't, and it really felt really bad because, and then it got so bad that, Chris actually, he wanted to become a motorcycle mechanic. So he left New York and moved to Phoenix. And he really wanted to get away from New York City because he couldn't stay clean or sober anymore. He just said, I can't. So he got himself into a motorcycle school and moved. So it was back down to Greg and I. And I tried to do something after Found Solution. We did a few rehearsals. We said, let's go back to what we used to sound like. Let's do this. By that point, I was really, really just ruined. I was ruined. I was a drug addict, and my mother had just died. When my mom died, there was a huge fight in the house. My stepfather took everything in my room, like this room or even your room, took it, boxed it, and got rid of it. So when I came home, my room was empty. So that means all master tapes, private stashes of photographs, personal, intimate photographs, pornography, all sorts of pornography. Everything you could possibly imagine that you try to hide from your folks, the folks saw. It got so bad they took this bag of toys to a lawyer, to the family lawyer. This had all sorts of stuff in it. And I had to go there, embarrassed, humiliated, and go and get my bag of toys back from the family lawyer. This is how bad it got. Yeah. And it got even worse. It got even worse after. And that's post-Found Solution that I can tell you how horribly bad it got. And it got really bad. And then I had to get out of Dodge, New York City, and come to L.A. Yeah. And, but so in that time period, and even Mark didn't like my drug use. Right. He didn't, no one really told me, don't do this. But it was pretty much tolerated until it couldn't be tolerated anymore. Right. So I kind of feel like Mark and I fell out as friends. Greg, because he's such a wonderful guy, he always stayed in my corner, but I know that he was hoping that I can get my act together. And Chris was more, Chris always, it was just hard because I was, between the three of us, I hung out with Chris the most. And Chris was not interested in the scene, the noise scene. He liked his music, he liked his motorcycles, and he liked his sort of peace. Greg was way more of the artist. So I relied on Greg for creativity and bouncing ideas off of. And then I'd bounce them off of Chris, and he would just say, sure, whatever. His job was just to show up, play, and leave. Or we would just go to a bar afterwards. So when it came to creativity, I really tried to pull it out of him. So you got this triangle of people trying to do things, and eventually the drugs took that to a sort of unworkable period. And then, you know, it took me a long time to sort of, once I finally got clean and sober, I had to make amends. I had to call Greg and tell him all of these. You already knew. You think you could hide things, but, you know, I said, you know, I was really, really bad. You know, like, we never fought about money. We never fought about status in the band. There was nothing like that. It was always like us against the world sort of mentality, like idiotic mentality. The world, you know. So like, but like I really felt that I had strained some relationships, you know, especially with Greg and then with Mark, you know, Greg and Mark, and all my other friends, you know, they were just cautiously watching and hoping that I got my act together. And it wasn't until to Los Angeles and got clean and sober and into a program that, you know, and I don't want to get into this whole, you know, I don't want to, you know, start talking about that, but yeah, I got clean and sober, and then I started to see about the wreckage of my past. And by that point, it was already too late to say I'm sorry to my mother for being such a lousy son. I had to make amends to my brother. He was just a young kid. And, you know, I wouldn't go over and throw a Nerf football with him, you know. And then he grew up and he didn't even have me because I was just too busy being Mr. Rock and Roll. So a lot of that is inside me. You know, and I never found a way to like really, I never wanted to use Final Solution as, you know, the base of any of that. So like, I'm not going to sing the song of sorrow and, you know, rejoice, because that's not what Final Solution do. That's not the, that's not the project. So it always had to stay as nasty and as harsh as possible. At the same time, my own life and the people around me, like Greg and Chris, you know, were deeply affected by that. But we just kept pushing and pushing and pushing because we didn't know any better. We figured that's the right thing to do. You know?
Wow. Well, I'm happy that, you know, things, you know, did clean up and settle themselves, and it seems like you've really learned a lot, and come a long way from that time. And can you tell me a bit more about Greg? Because I know from just what you're saying now that he was a very, very special and loving person, and I've also heard that from other people about him. And I don't know much about him, but you know, I've heard from like Michael Contreras and read, you know, that he was a very close friend of his, and that he was really important for him. Can you tell a bit more about him beyond, you know, after Final Solution and kind of your relationship outside of the band?
Sure. After Final Solution broke up, like I said, we tried to get a little project together afterwards, and I was in no condition to do that. I had just lost my mother, and I was a drug addict, and we had this photo session, and I was just fucked up, and he didn't want to. He just said, you know, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, take care of yourself. And he stopped calling me. And I felt that was the end of this relationship, our friendship, you know. And I said, okay. And, you know, it took a while. He was a very loving person. He was a very caring person. He lived with his mom, okay? And this is important because I couldn't figure it out before, but, you know, talking with Michael about this, he was pretty much his mom's caretaker. Anytime I tried to talk about his past as a father, you know, who was his father and any family, he didn't go very far with that. He was just shut down. And I respected that. Because when you get to know people, you talk about family. I mean, you talk about life. You talk about growing up. And stuff like that. So that was sort of, you know, a no zone. So we didn't go there. I had visited Greg several times in Staten Island, and I had met Emma, the mother, twice, once for dinner and once I just went over there. And, you know, I didn't pick up on it, but I should have, that, yeah, Emma was completely dependent upon Greg. And I think it limited his life, you know, that he would always have to be there for her, or at least, you know, be on top of what her life was. So after Final Solution, you know, I broke away from the whole scene. I really had to get my life together. I stopped talking with Mark. I stopped talking with Greg. And it took me about 2 or 3 years after, I would think, 3 years after, that I realized that I called Greg from Los Angeles. I told him where I was, that I was safe, and then I'm getting my act together, and I'm clean and sober now. I've got over a year now, you know. And we would chat online, you know, like on a phone every now and then. I'd call in and see how he was doing. You know, and then life gets busy, and then the phone calls and the letters. I would always write letters to him too, saying, "Hey, I'm doing all right. Ellie has a scene. It's really cool here." Blah, blah, blah. And then, like, you know, eventually life gets busy and the phone calls less and less frequent. Eventually the letters stop coming, and then you kind of drift away again. But he did send me his cassette of the project he was doing now called Hydra.
Right.
And I had a feeling, even as far back as maybe 93, 92, that he was working on things behind the scene, and he didn't want to tell me. So I think that he was already working on his own personal music at that point. You know, like, I didn't know much about Hydra, but I had a feeling that he was doing this music, you know, as early as Final Solution. But he didn't tell anybody. And I know that he worked with another band. He worked with a band called Beg for Eden. Mm-hmm. And some of the members of that actually helped him with Hydra. So it only made sense that he would stay close to his friends, his most intimate and personal friends, and not try to pick up outsiders and try to form another project. So he kept it sort of like in the realm of his friendships and people that he knew and trusted. And that's another thing, trust, you know. I mean, like, when you break trust like that, there wasn't really trust broken. It's just sort of like, how bad can someone get before you're just pathetic and you know, you can't work with them anymore? Uh-huh. So I was super, super happy. And when I heard Hydra, when he sent me the cassette, you know, I listened to it over and over again because I didn't have any collection at that point. Yeah. I barely had it. I was just living in LA, and I really didn't even think about doing music anymore. I figured this is my new chapter. Don't do music. But when I would listen to it, I would say, you know what? He's got it, man. Yeah. He's a great frontman. He would sing a few songs with Final Solution. He did Sperm Shower, Come OD, and Bludgeon. So we would give him the mic. We would kind of switch off a little bit. And I really thought that, you know, we should have did that more. Like, he would sing half the songs, I'd sing half the songs. But he was happy with the 3 that he did. And, you know, when I heard him on Hydra with the sounds and the work that he was doing and the vocals and the lyrics on top of it, I said, you know, this is truly him. When you listen to Hydra, that is Greg's soul. This is soul music. Mm-hmm. This is therapy. This is the real deal. So we're going to put all the art pretensions over here and talk about the core of why people do what they do. They do what they do because they live in a world sometimes that maybe they can't handle, or they're handling it, but there's just so much inside. And it's all on that Hydra Power. When you listen to Power, the others are great too, but Power is sort of like the magnum opus of Greg Scott, and that truly is his soul. So when I heard it, you know, I almost had, I don't want to sound pathetic, but I almost had tears in my eyes because I figured this is really where he needs to be. Yeah. And all I wished for Greg and Chris is that even if I never saw them again or never worked with them again, that they were happy, happy doing whatever they were doing. Yeah. And I didn't hear about Greg's suicide until maybe 1.5 years, 2 years afterwards, maybe 3. Okay. Wow. Because we lost touch with each other. And I think it was Dominic Furnow, Dom, told me what happened. And I didn't know. Now, in my mind, what I thought, and Michael cleared this up, that I thought that Emma, his mom, had passed. And her passing was such a devastation to him that now he was really on his own in the apartment. You know, that the loneliness and doing something seen for years was just gone. And that was part of, I have no idea what led up to his suicide, but Michael, he corrected me. He said, no, Emma was alive. I go,
Wow.
really? She was in the kitchen, and he was in the bedroom, and he shot himself.
Wow.
And I was that devastated me more.
That's terribly sad.
More, yeah. If that's how the story is, because I want to confirm this with Michael, because that's what he's telling me, and I don't want to get into what he said, but I think that what he told me is that he was still alive, and that he had shot himself. I don't know if there was a suicide note. I think there was a lot of things building up inside him over years.
Yeah.
His mother, because when I met her, this was like now several to 10 years after I met her. So she was already old. So now she's getting older.
Yeah.
And that working at a psych ward and coming home and working with someone who may not have their functionalities anymore, it may have gotten to him. Plus, I talked a little with Michael, and I think I never knew that Greg had a girlfriend. I never saw him with a girl. Chris and I had girlfriends, but I never saw him with a girlfriend, so I didn't know a lot of his personal life. And Michael told me that he did have a girlfriend at that point in New Jersey, but they had broken up. So here's a life coming, bidding down. And he committed suicide, and I was devastated. I was devastated with that. And
of course. That's terrible. It's very hard.
Now, years later, I don't know if you know this, but Chris also committed suicide.
I didn't. I was aware that he had passed, but I did not know how.
I was in touch with Chris. I had still stayed in touch with Chris, even though he had moved from Phoenix to San Francisco. And I had seen him in San Francisco a few times, and the few times I saw him, he didn't look good. He was really gone. I knew what was going on. I was already clean and sober, and I could just see it right through him. I said, dude, clean it up, man, please. I'll do anything. I'll come out here. I'll help you, whatever. So then he moved to Austin. He got out of San Francisco, and he moved to Austin. And I said, Austin's a cool town. It's got music. It's got art. It's got people. You'll love it there. But he was very dissatisfied with life. He was just always dissatisfied. He was always sort of like, he was homesick for New York ultimately, and he was homesick for San Francisco. He had really made a strong foundation friendship in San Francisco. And in Austin, he had fun, but he was really yearning to go back to San Francisco. And he got into a deep depression. I think he got into a deep depression. He was drinking a lot, and drinking and depression, and then becoming unemployed because he was working as a mechanic, and then he couldn't find work because of alcohol. A lot of things were going on. So eventually I was talking to him up until about the last week. The last week. And I didn't even read between the lines, because I remember one of the last phone calls we had, he said, because Sam was putting together the idea of putting out some Final Solution material. He had gathered it all
tapes.
up. Huh? Yeah.
Sam from Fake Tapes.
But yeah. And then Live Dead, Half Dead, and all of it. And then, the record and everything. So, I was trying to piece that together with Chris. Now, Chris, for all, things, he kept a lot of the Final Solution posters, flyers, photographs. He was really good with that. So I had lost all my stuff 3 times in my life. It's a big story, but I lost everything. So even fragments of Final Solution were gone, so he had it all. And he had a, what do you call it, USB, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
He had put things on files. He had sent that to Sam. And at that point, he was actually in touch with, before Sam, was Hal Hutchinson in the UK, who had found, check this out, Hal found the live tapes that Greg would record with Mike from Condom. Okay,
Wow.
so Mike from Condom, so he had sent him either the originals or copies to
Wow.
Mike, and Mike just stored them and didn't
Wow.
even think about it for years. And then somehow, I don't really know because it's super fuzzy, Hal talked to Mike. Hal, I think, was a huge fan of Final Solution.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but he found out about them and then talked to somehow Mike, and Mike said, I have something for you, and gave him this box of, like, I think 7 or 8 live tapes, Mass Death, that was only on cassette, but
Yeah.
we had, the master tapes were long gone because my stepfather threw them away. So because of Mike Condom and Hal Hutchinson and Cy Clark, they found this, like, horde of Final Solution material that I thought was long gone.
Amazing.
And then, yeah, and Chris had the photographs of us playing live.
Wow.
And, flyers and stuff like that. So it became this sort of project with Hal to put this together. So Hal put out the live tapes, and then, there was other stuff like Live Dead, Half-Life.
Yeah.
Half Dead. I'm sorry.
Half Dead, yeah.
Half Dead and Mass Death. Okay. That Sam found out about and was willing to, so he put out Half Dead on Page.
Yep.
And then the other stuff, there were the 2 singles on AWB
Right.
and the demo, and he tracked them down. So basically, this came together, and pretty much everything, for the exception of one record that got totally lost from my stepfather, all, like, the whole sort of collection of what was left of Final Solution after everything, because I don't know. I talked to Michael about what was left from Greg's personal collection, what happened to his gear, what happened to his art, because he did tons of art, like posters and collages, really great stuff. He had tons of it, and he had hordes of, like, photographs, everything that he would work with, because I visited his house. He was a graphic artist. So what happened to that stuff? What happened to his synths? Mike said, he didn't give me a real. In fact, he does. It's gone. So we basically couldn't get it.
Wow.
So that's just it. So there was probably a lot more left on the table, so to speak, when it came to Hydra.
Sure.
He probably had a few other things that he was working on or intended to work on before that happened. So that was it. And that was probably lost forever.
Wow.
And if it wasn't for Mike from Condom and Hal tracking it down, none of this would have happened.
Wow.
And this probably would have happened either. So it's been a long trek.
Amazing.
A long trek. I have amazing people in my life that, brought this all together.
Yeah. We really have to be grateful for those few people. It really just takes a few people to make something out of such, to rescue something. I mean, that's such an amazing story as you guys had, that due to life getting out of control, could have just completely disappeared. And, in many cases probably does. And some, other stories, and it, to have those few people, those, I want to call them angels that just, are the ones who take care of that stuff. And, it sounds like there were multiple. It sounds like, it sounds like Greg was an angel in his own way, just the way he took care of people and took care of things. And, that was passed on through other people, and that this legacy is kept alive.
Call it love.
Yeah.
Call it love.
Yeah.
Which is so strange, because here's a band that were down and dirty, one of the most hateful, antagonistic bands you'd ever hear. And in the middle of all this, it brings all these other people that have a love.
Yeah.
A love for the music and love for each other and looking out for each other.
Yeah.
And they helped out where I could not. I didn't have a computer for years until my wife bought me one.
Yeah.
My ex-wife.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be online, so I didn't do any of the footwork. They did everything.
Yeah.
And they need the utmost respect for having this happen. And I really think that, Hal, Cy, Sam, Grant, they saw the importance, the work in it, and didn't want it to just sort of disappear into obscurity. And they and Mike from Condom, they are the angels. They really helped out, and to tell you the truth, I would have said no. Like, Chris didn't. When I was talking to Chris about this, he was mildly detached.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I don't want to go in the past anymore.
Yeah.
I don't care about that stuff anymore. And I said, dude, come on, man. We put a lot into this.
Yeah.
And I had to basically get him on board with this. And then we did 2 shows, actually. We did a show in Austin.
Yeah.
And then we did in Los Angeles with Rusty Kelly playing synth. And once again, Chris was reluctant. He said, I don't want to do it. Greg is gone, and I just don't want to do it. And I said, dude, please, please, please. There's a show in your hometown in Austin. Let's just. And he did it, and then he did the show in L.A. And I really thought that, it would never be the same without Greg. But, Rusty's a good soldier. He's there. He really liked our band. And I said, he's the guy who booked the show in Austin. And I said, you're the co-pilot. You're in there, man. And put him in the band there, and we practiced. Another thing, too, is as a band, as Final Solution, we practiced. We rehearsed a lot. We rehearsed. So I remember, that before we do any show, we rehearse like at least 2 or 3 times. We try to get the sound there again. We don't just go on stage raw. I really tried to see it as a professional thing. So I flew to Austin. I was living in Dallas. I had recently been divorced. I went to Austin. We rehearsed and we played. I loved what happened. We got knocked off after 4 songs. They shut us down. We played with Brighter Death Now and a few other local ones. And
why?
It was just 4 times. Well, they didn't like the song Straight White Male. They thought I was saying Straight White Power or something, and I was saying Straight White Male. Anyway, the bartenders had a big problem with it. The sound engineer had a problem with it. And after 4 songs, after 28 years, 29 years, we got banned. We got kicked off.
Wow.
After 4 songs, and I said, good old days.
Yeah,
good
exactly.
old days.
I was going to say, that's how it's got to be.
Yeah, it's just like, that's Rusty was really upset. He goes, oh, I can't believe they did that. I go, don't worry about it. It's all part of it. It's part of our legacy. Of course, after 20-something years, almost 30 years now, we come on stage, and after 4 songs, they nix it. And I'm like, it's perfect. Yeah. That's what you give. You give people 4 songs, and then they throw you off, and that's perfect. And then Brighter Death Now. Really good to see Roger. He was a really big fan of our stuff. And that's really great, man. It's like, and then we played LA, and the LA show, we did our full set, and we played with, friends who were on the set with us. And it was really, really great. And then that was it. And then, we, Chris flew back home, and within, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 months, about a year after, then he committed suicide.
Wow. That's terrible. I didn't know that was so recent. Because I've been watching these things happen from afar. I've been watching these, the resurgence and the reissues, and I knew you guys played some shows. I thought I did not know that was so recent. Yeah, and of course, when Chris committed suicide, it triggered the idea of when Greg committed suicide too. So it's like a double whammy. So you kind of keep and every now and then I get into this funk. Yeah. The funk is that basically if we never did music again, like I said, and we never even talked or whatever, we fell out as friends, as long as they're out there and they're happy. Yeah. As long as they're living a life and the good and bads of life that happen, the ups and downs, we can handle. But when you're out of commission forever, then you really don't have another chance to have another good day. Maybe tomorrow will be better than whatever happened today. It's really hard. You've got to carry the torch for them. Yeah, after Final Solution, I did a lot of other music,
if you don't mind me talking about it.
Yeah,
So,
of course. I mean, please do. But I mean, you've got to carry the torch for life. I mean, you seem like you've made it out of a lot of, it could have gone elsewhere for you as well, and you made it out, and that's something. You seem to be like someone who's a fighter, and you just got to keep their spirit alive.
Oh, for sure, absolutely, all the time. Sometimes I have hesitation listening to my music, the Final Solution music. Like, I only played the records once just to hear what they sound like, and every now and then I'll just put it on. Their heart and soul is in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though it sounds very angry.
Right.
And perverted, and the songs have to do with sex and violence and death and destruction or whatever. I mean, the whole idea is that we had a unity, we had a friendship.
Yeah.
I'm actually writing a book about Greg Scott.
Yeah.
And my friendship with him for Michael, and I'm getting it done. I'm about 85% done. And instead of telling a lot of war stories about, being on stage, because basically when you're on stage, it's like a blur. Right. And I think that I've been on stage for 5 minutes when it's been like 40 minutes because I'm just in there. So I talk a little bit about the music. I talk about the friendship a lot. So many things that happened outside, and it took me a long time to sit there and really go back into my mind and all these little moments I had with Greg. Like just funny little moments where we were just like hanging out.
Yeah.
And, we went to a restaurant or something. We were in a conversation. We had a big argument once. We went up to, I'm not going to spoil anything. We went up to Connecticut with Chris in my car. I had this black car. I had a not a Camaro. I had a Trans Am.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And we went up to Connecticut to get some stuff from Chris's house because he was from Connecticut. We were driving back to New York City, and this is the day when they have those pull-out tape decks.
Yeah.
So I would listen to music, and really, really low was, because I listen to all sorts of music. I had Steely Dan. I'm a big Steely Dan fan, right? Steely Dan, and we're driving around, right? And then, Greg said to me, "What's this music? What's up with Steely Dan?" And I go, "Wow, they're great, man." He goes, "They got their name from William Burroughs, the Steely Dan from Make Lunch." And it's just like, the music is really dark. I mean, it's got this jazzy sort of feel, but extremely cynical. I mean, there's no heroes in the Steely Dan world.
Yeah.
He's driving, he goes, "They suck. This is the worst music ever." And it's bad enough. I got to hear this in the bar. Now you're playing it in the car. And we're going back and forth. And it was one of the first times when Greg and Chris, because they were still getting to know each other, kind of bonded.
Yeah.
Against Steely Dan. And I'm like, no, they're the best band. And they're my favorite band. He goes, "No, they fucking suck. They're terrible." And they kind of bonded against me. And it was just that one little moment where I added that to the book. I don't know if it'll stay, but the thing is that those little moments where we're bickering and we're sort of talking about. Then there was another time when we were practice, Chris was always late. He was always the last one there and the first one to leave.
Yeah.
And I would tune the synthesizers. So we would show up early, and it was just basically a tuning contest. So I was constantly tuning. I was like a tweaker. I was tuning, and it was just why are we doing this?
Yeah.
We're just unleash all this havoc, and I'm like, no, it's gotta be tuned. It's not exactly tuned, and I would bring this chromatic tuner, the electric tuners, and it's not exact. And it's and then Greg was into it. He said, "Yeah, it's got to be perfect." He said, "Yeah, let's see." We would just tune, and then Chris would come and he goes, "Are you doing this again? Why are you doing this?" I'm like, "Well, it's got to be tuned." He goes, "Oh, fuck the tuning." He said, "No, tune. And he goes, "Oh, you guys are fucking driving me crazy." So it was moments like that. We're in this stinky rehearsal space, and I described the spaces and the buildings and everything, the dampness of it all, how we would have these weird little moments together that they're endearing to me.
Of course.
Because that was part of the story. It's not just all the stage. It's little moments back then that I remember. And unfortunately, I couldn't get Chris to work with me on this because Michael had asked me to work on this, and Chris was still alive, and I said, "You've got to have some stories. What's your point of view?" It's like, I don't know. It's just like I don't really want to talk. It's like I'm not a good writer. I go, just talk to me. I'll record the conversations, and we'll work it out. Like, tell your side of the story. But he refused to. Just like I talk about in the book too. I say that I and Greg would beg Chris to do some solo synth work. And I said, Mark will put it out, or someone will put it out. I want you. I said, I'll bring the synth. I'll bring the amp. I'll bring the beer, the booze, whatever. All I want you to do is to play the synth. Greg will record you. And he refused all the time. I said, please do this, please, because I want you to have a solo act. So it would have been Chris's solo act, Final Solution, and Hydra. At least there would have been 3, streams. Yeah. But he didn't do it. He didn't do it. And I talk a little bit about it in the writing that I'm doing, and I'm like saying, God, he was just so reluctant.
Yeah.
His punk name was Chris Useless. He really had this sort of like very, very, cynical way of looking at life. And that came out through music. So I knew he was the perfect member for Final Solution, even though he didn't. He contributed a lot of the attitude. Yeah. And he kept it, because every time I kept lofty and I said I want to be a big rock star, he would always crush that. Yeah. And it's the sort of mechanics. He, like if you see the cover here, I basically, the image of the hands I got from a bondage magazine. Yeah. And Greg put the skull. That's our skull. That's basically Greg had a skull. So he just plastered it on there, and that's what became. So this is how we worked. I would give Greg something, and he would do something with it. You know. So like I'm always very happy when I see this, because I know this is how we work. I gave him the hands, the tight hands. He did the skull. Yeah. And that's how it worked. And I love that about it. So like that's what I had from Greg, and from Chris I had that sort of like punk rock sort of let's just get out there and tear the shit up sort of mentality. So I'm like, it was the best of like 2 different worlds coming together.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys had like a really perfect team. Everyone had their role, and everyone had everyone had their role. Everyone had their trifecta role. I mean, it was like a triangle.
That's right. And when Chris left, we knew that we couldn't do Final Solution. No. We couldn't do it together. That's why Greg and I tried to get back together and do something called the Institute of Death Studies, which is basically what he used as a letterhead. Mm-hmm. He would write letters all the time. I talk about it in the book too, correspondence. Back then, in the 80s and 90s, before the internet, you still had to write letters. Yeah. And you still had to, like, when you made a phone call, someone had to be on the other end of it. Now, we have the luxury of you can be in Antarctica and you can call somebody and you get them. Right. At this point, someone had to be, so you had to, like, sometimes I had to use a payphone and call Greg and say, hey, you better get down here or whatever. So he had to be home. If he wasn't home, he's somewhere out there. Yeah. Hopefully, so all of that is sort of, I think a lot of people, if there are 2 generations now that have passed, come, don't understand, like, maybe I'm an old timer, but like, that's the way it was. Yeah. Now we have the luxury of like phones and, hey, I'll give it to you immediately. Here it is. If you can send a file, you can do all this. But back in those days, you had to like write a letter, bring it to the post office, wait, get a response. Great. Let's go. And make phone calls, make contacts. And Greg was really into that. That was amazing. Like he would do like art for the projects and for the envelope. He was constantly doing that. And I got in touch with Keith Brewer from, Taint. Yeah. At that point, he was still doing misogyny. Right. So I had my little sort of like, Rolodex of names and numbers of people that I knew. And Greg had his little, contacts. So we got them together, and I gave him all my contacts, and I said, keep in touch with all these people, and they're all good people. And he was the one who basically did all of the correspondence. I still kept the P.O. box in Long Island City, Queens, for rollover stuff. So if stuff would come, I would give it to Greg, and, oh, here's a letter. And we were getting fan mail at one point.
Yeah.
At one point. And then when we got on AWB, Mark and Greg took care of whatever correspondence for Final Solution. And I took the back seat, and I stopped kind of writing people. And, I wasn't doing my full share.
Sure.
Because he let him do it. And I felt really bad that I would kind of like shove it onto him. Like, hey, great. You want to do mail? Here, do all this mail. See you later.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting what you say about those times with the letters, the phone calls, the slow communication, because I also I interviewed Andy Bolus a couple of weeks ago from Evil Moisture, and he talked about that too. And I think it's easy to kind of wax poetic and say, oh, those times were so much better, and blah, like everyone likes to kind of do that. Oh, social media has ruined everything. But at the same time, I don't think you have many bands, power electronics, industrial noise bands in this day and age that work like you guys did in such a, dedicated, really committed way in this day and age when everything is so much easier. You have a lot more communication and ease of communication, but I don't see hardly any, close, really intense working relationships like that from back in those days. One exception. This probably not the only exception. One exception I think is Mac Shammy and Sam Torres, who do Kufar and Terracell Unit, because they're Mac is in LA and Sam is in the Bay Area, but they work like a very they go on stretches of 5 days studio. We're sleeping over every night and we're working on it all. Like they're like that. But in a general sense, I don't see a lot of that.
It's there. I mean, there's collaborations,
of course,
and there's still bands. I would have to say bands like Genocide Organ,
right,
or Brighter Death,
right.
Or maybe there's it centers around Roger, or
right.
a group, a core member.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff going on, like the whole, is it Finland or Sweden, Bizarre Uproar,
yeah,
the whole crew.
Yeah.
And then you've got like crews in certain cities that cook together, collab together,
yeah,
work together.
Yeah.
As far as like hunkering down and working, I don't know what people's workflows are. I don't know if, Genocide Organ or the Grey Wolves actually formulate their music and say, this is how we'll approach it and try to record it. As a band, because I considered ourselves a band, we would do songs over and over and over again until we just right. I learned that from hardcore bands.
Yeah.
I learned bands like Sheer Terror from New York City.
Yeah.
Or even Black Flag. There are, I read several times that Black Flag, Greg Ginn, was a workaholic.
Yeah.
That he would set up his stuff. He can play from 12 noon to 12 midnight over and over again.
Yeah.
Over and over again. Because there was nothing else to do in Redondo Beach except get the music. And that's why, and then it's sort of like, when you have that military regiment, like boom, 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 and do the set over, take a break, do the set over, take a break. And it's like, how many times? But by the third time, it's so inside you, it's like, we can do this. Yeah. One more practice just before we play live, and then we go out there and just wipe it out. Yeah. And I'm not going to say that I was in competition with anyone. I wasn't in competition with Mark from Intrinsic Action or the Grey Wolves. But I went out there like, I'm going to kick ass. Yeah. I'm an ass kicker. I'm going to kick ass tonight. And I always had that mentality. I know it sounds silly and rock and roll, but I just want to give people the very most. Yeah. And not bore them. Yeah. I don't want to bore people. This is another thing, because I could have played noodling, and that's cool. Right. I love it. Reading books, chilling out with my girlfriend. It's nice sounds, very nice. But when I'm out there, it's war, and it's just keep giving as much as possible. So that work ethic comes from bands like Sheer Terror, a lot, Black Flag, many others. Negative Approach, Poison Idea. I can go on and on about the punk bands that inspired us. Inspired me, inspired Chris and Greg, because I turned them on to a lot of them. And then just say, let's bring that energy and that work ethic to the stage and just keep going.
Yeah.
Fortunately, of course, drugs took hold, and I thought I can do this big juggling act, and it all fell apart. Although if I'd never gotten into drugs, I really feel that Final Solution would be a totally touring act. I wanted to be a touring act. I wanted to be like AC/DC. I wanted to hit 50 cities in 2 months, take a break, and do it again. Because that's what I saw punk bands doing. Got in vans, and they went from city to city to city to city. And I said, if I could have that, that's the life for me, because that's it. And just keep nailing it and nailing it and nailing it. And that was like my fantasy, to do that. But it never happened because it fell apart. That's all.
Yeah. I believe it could have been. What do you hope people take away from? Sorry?
Yeah, go ahead. No. I just hope that somehow this is an inspiration to people. Anyone who sees this or listens to it or thinking about doing music, just get yourself some gear. This is what Greg would say. Get yourself some gear, book a show, get a singer.
Yeah.
I like singers. Get a singer out there who's kind of nuts or daring enough to be out there. Give them the mic, turn on the synth, and step back and let them rip. Because that's what's really exciting. Otherwise, I can just sit home and play my own synthesizer. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question, actually. I was just going to ask you, what do you hope people take away from the legacy of Final Solution?
Inspiration. I want to inspire people. I want people to say, wow, I'm not alone, and I don't know what to do with myself, and, I don't have much money for gear, and I don't even know what the hell I'm doing. I'm like, well, go to a pawn shop, go to a Best Buy, and buy one of those preset, and just try to get like cheap pedals, plug it all in, see what it sounds like, record it. Even if you don't have a big recording, just get a tape recorder and record the thing next to an amp, and then try to reproduce it. Or basically, find a singer. I like working with people.
Yeah.
For as much as I don't like people, I really do like them.
Yeah.
And I want to work with them. And I like, if I said, hey, this guy you want to do the singing? Here's the mic. So it's like kind of like insane karaoke. It's like, I'm about to put a nut, full-blown nut that I met outside a club, on stage with a mic.
Yeah.
And say, okay, go for it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and then just go. Because bands are hard to keep together.
Yeah. And
bands like a big family. And unless it becomes basically, bands are business.
Yeah.
And you got to really run it like a business. It can't, the first 6 months, it's like, it's the honeymoon. Oh, we got a band. It's fun. Ha ha ha. But then as you go on, it becomes really a part of your life, and, becomes much more like, hey, we got a rehearsal. Oh, I can't go to rehearsal. I got to go to school. Hey, so like with noise and experimental music, as long as you know maybe a little bit about what your gear can do, and you have some sort of feeling or ideas are important.
Yeah.
One thing that I have to say, a lot of the harsh noise walls sort of lack imagination.
Yeah.
You could just take like some sort of like still from a horror movie and call it something horrifically bad, and then have 30 minutes of sheet noise. I'm like, I've listened to a lot of that, and I have a project like that myself, but how much can you take? I don't know. Some people are, fanatics about it, and I'm like, okay. But I kind of like ideas, and I like people, and I like when you interact with that. There's nothing like that sort of punk element where you've got a front person, a stage person, or a singer out there antagonizing, interacting with the group, cracking jokes. Yeah. There's people, a lot of people would basically, scream obscenities to us. A lot of our friends would just basically, it was just like, so it's sort of like the Muppet Show with, the two guys with this. They're in there and they're like, like all of that, that's part of the sort of interaction with it. Yeah. And that was the one thing, like when I noticed in Austin and in LA, it's like, I think a lot of people were excited to see the band, but I wanted someone to scream something. Yeah. I wish there was a friend that just like would scream like, Astoria, or like, it was like something they would know about me, and I'd be, that's good. Like just heckle me, because the more you heckle me, the more I get into it. I'm like, that's good. Interaction. But then I don't want to turn to a joke band. We're not a joke band. So it's like, I can give you a little bit of like the old fuck you attitude, and at the same time, joke on us too, It's a big joke. Have some fun with this. Another thing that we tell you the truth, we never did merch. We never showed up. And this is something that I had problems with Greg with. Greg would say, "Oh, we got to have a merch table." I'm like, Chris refused to stand near any table. The moment we played, we were out the door. We're just like, we're leaving. A friend of ours, like Mark, were playing. We left. We never did merch. And then we always tried to put as many people on the guest list as possible. So we would not make any money. It would be like no money. Like we would always have like arguments with the door people, like all these people have to be on the guest list. I'm like, there's 30 people on the guest list. Well, I get it, they're all coming. There'd be no one. So it's like a free show. It's like, so we'd always have these bickering. So it was really funny. Like we would still have these sort of juvenile fights with people, but we did do merch, you know, and it was just really, really funny. Whenever we got to a club, I or Chris, both of us, would check back doors, because if things got really hairy and crazy, or the sound man or someone was really upset with the music or the sound of the lyrics, and they tried to attack us, we just like unplug, pack up, and get the hell out. We're just like, we had to escape because we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know how people were going to react to the music. Yeah. Our first shows, I would say pretty much all our shows until Mark moved to New York, Brooklyn, is we played with bands. So we played in front of other people's audiences, which was great because now the audience knows what to expect. It's a set audience. They came to see you. But in those days, we would play in front of other people's audiences, and they hated us. But Chris always said, there's always one dude, there's always one person out there that loves what we do. They love what we do. It's just that one person who said, yes, that spoke to me. It's all worth it. It was all worth it. And Chris would always say that. He goes, there was always like this one maniac out there who loved what we do. And everyone's just like, these guys suck and they're saying terrible things. And I'm like, but we got that one person. And that's the person. That's the person we really try to connect with.
Hell yeah.
The rest of them, whatever.
Hell yeah.
You know.
That's awesome. So tell me what you've been up to otherwise musically, like lately.
Thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about it.
Of course.
I have several projects, going in. When I got to Los Angeles, I was still trying to get my wits about me. I didn't know what direction I was taking. I was completely vanquished. My mom left me a tiny little bit of money, and being a drug addict, I went through that. So when I got to LA, I had no money. It took me a long time, like at least 3 years, before I started to think about doing music. I really wanted to dedicate my life to getting my act together. I had no money. I was couch surfing. I was sleeping in garages. I was sleeping anywhere people would have me. Right. I was bouncing from place to place. Eventually, I settled in San Fernando Valley in a beat-up old house, earthquake damaged. I got along with the landlord. He let me live there for free, because he just wanted me to keep the place up. It didn't have heat, didn't have hot water. It was pushed off its foundations. It was a little sheltered, but it was a home. It was a place, and there were meetings, 12-step meetings right up the street. So all I did, work, meeting, home, work, meeting, home. And I can have this triangle. Yeah. I can survive somehow. I have a purpose, I have income, and I have shelter. Yeah. Done. And I lived like that for 3 years. No music, no instruments, no nothing. And then I started to get some instruments. I ran into a friend of mine. He lived with me, and he said, why don't we just get something together? So I started to collect some more instruments and stuff. And then I did a bunch of stuff. I had it all. I lost it. Don't worry. And then as time went on, I just developed several different projects for different moods, or it wouldn't fall under one thing. I didn't go back to power electronics. Mm-hmm. I didn't go back to power electronics because the climate in LA was really different. It was harsh noise, harsh experimental. I went to it was the Impala Club, the Impala, and I saw like Damian Romero. Mm-hmm. I saw Spectrum Fight, Finn, Spastic Colon. Yep. And they were the biggies here, and I saw that it was really, really great, innovative noise. It was really great. It's like Damian Romero is like really on another, because he builds these things, and he doesn't even like interact with it a little bit. They kind of do their own thing. He just kind of so he was just like, whoa. And I said, that's the scene. And like, for me to start a power electronics thing into this climate, not really. You know, it's sort of like a lot of people kind of sidestep the power electronic thing because it's too confrontational, and you know, so, and I didn't want to do any Final Solution Light 2.0, and I didn't want to make it light or politically correct. I always said PE, not PC. That's it. You know, that's it. So I started to get the gear, and I started to work back into what electronics did and what gear did. Damien actually and Jeff Brandon from Finn turned me on to the TRW swap meet. TRW, the big, huge corporation, they have a lot of engineers and scientists and stuff, and they had a swap meet where there was nothing but electronic gear.
Wow.
So you can get oscillators and you can get oscilloscopes and all sorts of gear. So I would go with them and then with a few friends down there and pick up stuff and mix it with like a cheap keyboard or a synthesizer. I'd get a pawn shop, or I bought one and it was like presets, and if you run it through a few. So like I started to slowly build, you know, ideas back together. And I guess I am a sort of a conceptualist because I frame a lot of my projects based on ideas. So, you know, and then, or I'll take on like one tape might be based on a book. So I'll take in a year and I say, I really like this book. So I'll take chapters and I'll kind of like make, you know, sounds that kind of, or, you know, unofficial soundtrack of this book because I want people to read this book because I thought it was really good. And as long as I have a sort of, that's the, you know, the grist of give me an idea that I can work with. And it's not necessarily serial killers. It's really about like, now it's more about life. So I have a project with John Grimaldi in Pennsylvania. I'm in LA. And what I wanted to do is, instead of being a vocalist, because I really feel like I only want to dedicate my vocals to Final Solution or a very special situation, is I'm a lyricist. I write a lot of lyrics. For good or bad, I write a lot of lyrics. I've been writing lyrics since day one. And they're very more personal, way more personal, and very on power electronics. So they're kind of like songs. And I give them to John, and John sings them, puts them into, you know, and there's no beats and there's no music. It's just sort of like, you know, kind of pulsating stuff and like shifting stuff. He sings right on top of it. And we do a project called Defective together. And we have one tape out on Fusty Cunt. And I really like the way that Jim Harris from Deterge. And I really like, we have some other tapes too, but that one came out really good because it's primarily John singing. And we had two other tapes that John put out as well that were pretty much like, you know, industrial sort of noisy ambient pieces and stuff. But now we're focusing on vocals and we're focusing on lyrics.
I'm pretty sure I've got it in my distro here in the mail order. I'm pretty sure I have it.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. So that's what I'm working on with John. And then I have a friend, Kirk, and we do a project called Caveat Emptor. And this is really sort of like, in a way, it's almost privatized music because we've never recorded for a record label. We've been around now for about, I don't know, 20 years now, maybe 15, 20 years. We've only played about 9 shows. I think did I send you a link to it? If not, I can send you a link to it.
I don't think so.
And because Kirk is a real musician, you know, that's what he does. He's like a full-blown composer musician. We don't play out often because he's got to be in LA working on straight up hardcore composition and music. He's a fantastic guitarist. I mean, just unbelievable.
Cool.
He doesn't do guitars in this project. We do electronics. So he built a set and I have a system and then we sort of do this. So every now and then, like maybe once a year or every other year, we go out and we just play a live show.
Mm-hmm.
And I could send you a link to a video that we had done or a few years ago. And that's a really special project to me because we both get to do something together. And there's no pretense that it's going to get better, bigger, take it on tour and do it. It's just sort of like it's LA bound.
Yeah.
So, and we just get shows and that's it. I mean, it's just like, but the electronic instrumentation in it is really unique. It's just like he built this sort of like suitcase with sort of like really like, custom made electronic pedals that interact.
Cool.
And then I have this thing. It's basically a case that's it's basically an oscillator creator.
Mm-hmm.
I got it at PRW Swap Meet, and the thing is just like mind blowing. You just use one or two effects on this thing, and you just and we just do these sort of like long sets, but they have lots of shifts, lots of changes.
Cool.
Not boring at all.
Nice.
Boredom is And then I've got Walmart. Walmart is basically a wall noise project.
Cool.
And I tried to take on the idea that, you got these big box stores in America, as you probably know. They're all over, especially on Mall of America.
Yeah.
So I try in my way. It's almost like, culture jamming where it's noise walls, but it's all about when people go into it basically that Walmart and big box stores are zones of aggression.
Yeah.
That there's tons of these videos of people just duking it out in the aisles.
Yeah.
And almost riot lights at Black Friday. They open the doors. So I saw all this aggression going on, and it's almost like suburban aggression. And I'm like, okay, so people are like fighting for like PlayStations or, toys or whatever. And I'm like, okay, so that to me speaks to me. So I flipped it and I say, Walmart that has everything you can possibly imagine doesn't have anything to do with noise.
Yeah.
I would love an aisle of just nothing but like, noise components.
Yeah.
You can go in there and make it more accessible to people. Why not? All this other pop culture that you see and all the stuff that you see, why is it that all of this gets mad props, lots of money, lots of investment? Why is it that the noise scene, the underground noise scene has never been able to lift itself up higher?
Right.
Some of the academic stuff, and like it gets like, credit in like certain academic high-end areas. Right. And there's a stratification of the low end and the high end. Right. I know in other countries, other countries and other, counties, if you will, in Germany and all over Europe, they're a lot more supportive of art. In America, we had the NEA, and it was the National Endowment of the Arts, and that was big money. Yeah. And it didn't really work out for the smaller artists. Yeah. Okay. So independent artists is this a hobby, or is this like a lucrative business, or is it a lifestyle? So you have to float between it. Yeah. See, Sam, I feel, has the perfect business model. Yeah. Okay. Because it's nonprofit. Yeah. And, even the artist copies, I didn't want any. I said, sell them all, sell everything. I know what it sounds like. He gave me a copy. I'm very blessed. But I said, take the rest. And the little part of it is that if someone I know wants a CD, maybe just gift them, bless them with one. Yeah. Hey, can you sell? And he was always like, no problem. And I said, that's how you pay me. Yeah. You pay me if you can send somebody a CD that really wants it. Maybe they don't have, let me just help out a person and just give them something. And that's it. As long as I don't abuse that and say, send 25 out, 50 out. No. But the thing is that, and I think he really has a really great business model. I see his amazing passion for it. Yeah. I saw it in Oxalitroff. He had an amazing passion for it. And there's a right way and a wrong way and it's sort of in the middle. So another thing too is that you learn a little bit about business and interacting with people when you do noise. So if you're like in a small town in the Midwest and you don't get along with the rest of the people and you're doing your noise project. And I really feel now, to tell you the truth, that the noise that's coming out of America is coming from the smaller towns. Yep. Because there's nothing there. There's no culture. Yep. There's no art. And they're isolated. And I can only imagine they interact slightly, but how horrible it might be. I'm spoiled. I'm always in big cities. I can go out right now and see the band if I wanted to. So like these are the artists that I see the most passion. They're putting all into it because what else is there? John Grimaldi, I work with, lives in Morris, Pennsylvania. I think the total population is like maybe 1,400.
Yeah.
1,400. Henry Mallett, a really good friend of mine.
Yeah.
He lives in Stumptown, Pennsylvania Hypno Center. It is a phenomenal noise fanatic.
Yeah.
He lives in Stumptown, which isn't even really a town. It seems like it's just a country. It's like rural area. He lives on almost like a farm. He much lives on a farm. But just imagine the passion of just being away from a city. Like he's about 90 miles away from Pittsburgh. You would have to go all the way there. I met him when his mom was still driving him to shows. So that's the passion right there.
Yeah.
That's the passion.
Yeah.
Guys like me, maybe you are spoiled where I can just go out right now, get a gear, go get a show in LA or New York or whatever. That, we're a little spoiled because we have culture all around us. I was brought up in a world of culture. Yeah. But when you come to this small town, and I see support those people as much as you can. Yeah. He lives in a small rural area too in Pennsylvania. Yeah. And he's got a big machine of fusty cunt. Yeah. He's putting out stuff all the time. He's accepting stuff all the time. And I mean, that's love right there. That's a passion. For sure. You can disconnect from the larger structures of art. Yeah. Because there's this big world of art that, like I said in PS1, I saw up close. And I got to see that it's basically a stratified structure of wealth and power that dictate what is art and the commodifying of that. Back in the old days, I used to talk with Chris and Greg about this. I go, can we force people to like us? And they go, no. I'm like, you can't hold people at gunpoint and say, you got to like our music. And I'm like, no, we can. And they go, we always toss this stuff around. Like, how do you get people to like what you do? You have to be liked. Yeah. You separate the art from the artist. Like, you might hate me, but you might love Final Solution. Yeah. You might love Final Solution, and vice versa. You might love me and hate what what Final Solution did or whatever else I'm doing. Yeah. So it's sort of like, hopefully, the artist and the art are sort of on the same level, and you like the artist, you feel the artist is honest and sincere and not trying to smoke you on, Yeah, and
that's the most important.
You have some sort of interpersonality with them, like, hey, I get this, and he's approachable. If I was just like, and, I'm like, you know what? You can go back to school and have professionals like my girlfriend, and now here's the big plug, who's a professional professor of sociology. And here's the plug. This is her book.
Okay. It's cool.
Inequality. Okay.
Super.
Yeah. A contemporary approach to race, class, and gender.
Great.
And the reason why I'm talking about this is this became extremely important to me. I saw her read, this is the second edition of it, so I see her write most of this and what it takes to actually put together real science. This is science. There's a lot of graphics in here, statistics, everything. This is hardcore. Okay. This explains why the world that we live in has what it has in it. Yeah. Okay. I'm not saying this is the Bible. What I'm saying is that why is it the way it is? Why are the rich people over here and the poor people over there? Yeah. Why is there some racism, classism, sexism, and everything else in there? Yeah. Where did it create from? How did it happen? Yeah. Is it fair that some people so much and other people have so little? Yeah. Is there fairness? What is fairness? Right. It's all in here and in a few other books. I moved away from philosophy because I really was interested in philosophy, and I read a lot of philosophy trying to understand myself, search my soul. Yeah. Until I met Darby, and Darby said, "You really want to shift over to sociology?" And I go, "Why?" It goes, "Because this is the real meat. This is what's really going on." Right. Whether there's a God or is the ins, the outside, what's being, what's time, that's all fun stuff. Yeah. But what's going on out there in this world, this technology, our conversation, everything that we're talking about is happening in the social. No matter how isolated, angry, frustrated, pissed off, robbed, cheated that you feel. There's a reason why, and it's underneath all of it. And science, not opinion, science of this book has, and many, many other books, but this one is keeper. And I'm not saying it because my girlfriend's right there, but the thing I'm saying is that it changed my life because I understood that we come into these things sometimes with biases.
Right.
We come into the world saying, how come them? Why not me?
Right.
How come this and not that?
Right.
Why is it this way? Why did they take abortion? They overturned abortion recently.
Yeah.
Why are there kids going into schools with guns?
Yeah.
Why is there, all this mass stuff going on? No one really has a straight answer because it's very complicated.
For sure.
But if you start to look at science and you start to talk about what they call stratification.
Yeah.
Stratification, okay?
Yeah.
The width and depth of a society.
Yeah.
She is put together, and I go on about this a little bit because it blew my mind.
Fantastic.
It blew my mind. And in there is noise too, because noise looks at the world at a different perspective than most other art. Most other art is reflective.
Yep.
Art is sort of a reaction to, or you can create just objects.
Yep.
Noise has a way of being a sort of openness between subjectivity and objectivity.
Yep.
And in there somewhere, we create the best work.
Yep.
Because it's neither object nor product, nor is it sort of a weird sentimentality that forms some sort of materialism, right? So you have like means of production.
Yep.
Means of production. If it wasn't for tape companies and it wasn't for CD and record companies, what would we do?
Hey everyone, thank you for watching the Final Solution episode. If you're enjoying this, please consider supporting it at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. There's a lot more coming this month. Interviews from Joe Romer of Macronympha, Ted Burns, and Mass Marriage. So if you appreciate this programming, if you enjoy it, if this is what you're about, please support it. Patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. Thank you. I want to ask you what your top 5 noise releases or power electronics, general, industrial, of all time are.
The top dog will always be Suicide.
Okay.
Because when I was 14 years old and I walked in to see Max's Kansas City and I saw that happening, it changed everything.
Yeah.
But guys can create that with no full band. And Alan Vega is just the most fabulous, flamboyant, charismatic singer.
Yeah.
Something like Elvis Presley from the future.
Yeah.
And the street feel with Martin Rev with his wraparound glasses, zipped up jacket just not almost like Sparks.
Yeah.
Where he's just really, really tight. And it's just like, and I'm just like, I just thought I went into another world.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's the sound of that's the sound of New York City.
Yeah.
The deep inside, like, that's it.
Yeah.
So I would Suicide. If it was no Suicide, there'd be no Final Solution.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
For me, I know I'm going to answer your question, but I want to talk about conceptual artists.
Sure.
So people like Vito Acansi.
Mm-hmm.
Vito Acansi was a New York, conceptual artist that I had seen his early stuff, and Vito Acansi really spoke to me as far as like what he was doing with space and his body and material. Joseph Beuys from Germany is another that when I saw what he was doing with, once again, materials, strange materials that he was working with, like tallow and felt and everything, and his concepts of these things and what art is and how it rolls out like that was just heavy. It was just like it really shifted my dimensions on what things are, what things could be. There's a few others, like I appreciate Richard Serra, who works with heavy steel.
Yeah.
If you imagine how 10 tons of steel, 15 tons of steel, okay, and moving it and creating something, a lot of people say, well, it gets tiring. It's like once you've seen it, and he does a lot of like public art, like for, squares and corporations and stuff. But like, I've seen his early stuff, and you got to understand that he's probably spending hours and hours working on steel, metal, just forming, creating it, moving it from space A to space B.
Yeah.
And I'm like, he's an engineer. He's like the weight of these things, the presence of these things. When you're in the room with like a Richard Serra, you can feel the presence of it.
Sure.
It's black metal. It's heavy.
Yeah.
There was another artist I liked that worked in New York City called Gordon Matter Clark.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon Matter Clark was amazing. He worked directly with structures. He would bore holes literally through gallery floors. He did this at PS1.
Yeah.
He went to the top floor and he bored a hole straight through every floor so that you can actually look down from the top floor down.
Wow.
Why would he do something like that? He would find buildings that were in decay and and he would cut them in half and just leave them off center so there's constant tension.
Yeah.
The very fact that you can just take material and just do something completely different to it, and it looks destructive.
Yeah.
It's almost a destructive thing. It's like he's not making it better.
Yeah.
He's doing something completely different to it, and like you're saying, wow, and you're like, and it's raw. It's not dolled up.
Right.
He'll take a pickaxe to a wall and just bash right through it, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's your art.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
That's it. You don't need any other electronics or spectacles or light show. That's it. So that is the fundamental, actually, of what. Now, moving forward, there's a lot of classical music that I like too, and it speaks directly to my soul. For experimental music, let's say I'll start with maybe number one, maybe not too much. Yanis Xenakis did a piece called World War I. I bought the electroacoustic music on None Such Records for $2.99 at the Tower Outlet.
Wow.
There's an ad for cheap, and they had cheap electronic records. And I turned Greg onto this. I actually bought him that record. Al Margolis, who did Sound of Pig music, tape label, he turned me on to the Tower Annex, because there's the big Tower store on Broadway, and around the corner was the Tower Annex. And he said, go in there, all electronic music. So I flipped, and I saw Todd Dockstader, Karl-Heinz Stockhaus, and Yanis Xenakis, all these others, $2.99, $3.99, cheapish stuff. And I was just, okay. I took it home. I listened to Yanis Xenakis, electroacoustic music, Borehole 1, which is a side-long piece. And to me, it's one of the ultimate drones.
Yeah.
It just, the way it sort of like breathes, it goes this way, it comes back. And it just like, it accumulates and accumulates. If you listen to the last maybe 3 or 4 minutes of it, it's just sheer noise.
Yeah.
It's about as noisy as you can get anything of the pop. And just when it came out in 1962, I believe, and this is the definitive recording of it because I never heard anyone ever try to attempt to do it before, it just brings you to another place because it's just like something pushing on you and coming back. And at the end, it's just this. Yeah. It's just like, whoa.
Awesome.
And that's a composition.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing has breathing. There's whole things going on in there. Industrial music, there's a lot of it. I would have to say I really like maybe the first SPK record, Throbbing Gristle record. I really like the first Lustmord record, the very first one, before he went into the deep drones and get a little quasi-scientific. But the first one that he put out, I think it's on Side Effects Records, which was SPK's label, is great. It's a combination of like tapes and synths and metal smashing. And there's a lot of different things going on in there. There's a guy named John Murphy. I really like John Murphy because John Murphy worked with SPK, White House, and several others. I can't remember right now. But he was just sort of like, Current 93, and Nurse with Wound. So he was the man about. He was all over the place. He was in Australia, and then he's going to the UK, and he's working with almost the very first wave, into the second wave of industrial music. And he is like a legend hero. John Murphy, who no one should ever forget his name, because he really was there and he worked and he heard what other people are doing and added to it rather than, hey, I'm here too and this is my trip. It was like, I'm listening to what you're doing, I'll do this.
Yep.
And I really appreciate his subtlety. And then he had his own solo stuff called Crank, I believe it's called.
Yep.
I still have
Ladder
that
Knife,
CD.
right?
Yeah. That stuff. It's wonderful because he listens. He's a listener, and he can get in there, and he worked with all the classics. I was a real early stuff before any of this in the 80s.
Yeah.
I like Boyd Rice and Monty Gazzazza because they were almost like antagonistic.
Yeah.
They had this sort of like, I'm going to shock the audience. I'm going to attack things.
Yeah.
I'm going to destroy things. And I really kind of liked their tongue-in-cheek attitude because before Boyd Rice went full-blown into a sort of pseudo-Nazi fascist world, he was a prankster.
Yeah.
You know, he took things that scared people like clowns and Charles Manson and Jim Jones.
Yeah.
Same thing with Costanza. And he flipped it and they turned it into something that was fun, funny.
Yeah.
Like there was an irony behind all of this. So either you can take them deadly serious and say they're psychopathic and they're sociopathic, or they're sort of like, this is a joke.
Yeah.
The whole thing is a scam and it's a goof.
Yeah.
And I really like sort of play. It's almost like culture jamming, pre-culture jamming, because and their stuff is always like on top. It always sounds great.
Yeah.
You know, whether Gazzazza with Fat Tricks or Throbbing Gristle, he was deep in the scene.
Yeah.
He created the term industrial music for industrial people.
Yeah.
So he's absolutely there. Gazzazza and Boyd Rice, because it scared people. I could only imagine what the first Boyd Rice performances were, especially when we played the Whiskey a Go-Go to a beer drinking crowd. Here to see some music, and he's shocking them with that. Same thing with Zev.
Yeah.
Zev, the percussionist.
Percussionist, yes.
I was I saw Zev do UNS, U-N-S, his side project in New York City at the Joseph Papp Theater. He actually played with the Nihilistics, a great punk band that I'm friends with, and
you guys
big inspiration.
Them.
We do. Yeah. So the Nihilistics played with several other bands, but played with UNS, Zev, and it was just amazing. That's all I can tell you.
Cool.
What he was doing with his voice, what he was doing with the sounds, and then afterwards there was an after party at someone's apartment, and we all were there, the Nihilistics, Zev, and I talked with the guy, and he was the sweetest, smartest, unpretentious dude I ever met.
Mm-hmm.
Unpretentious dude I ever met in my life. And I'm going to tell you a weird story because I love these little stories.
Yeah.
It's not in the book. I'm going to tell you. For a time, I was working on a double-decker bus giving tours in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a double-decker bus for tourists.
Yeah.
And I've got a bowl, and I'm looking around. So I see this person on the street with a white fedora, beautiful white slacks, white shirt, perfect. And I'm looking, and I'm saying, I got to stop. The bus stopped to let some tourists on, whatever. They take breaks at these stops. I get off the bus, and I walk over, and I look at his ears. He's got all these earrings and all these ears. And I knew for no doubt, I said, Zev. And he turned, and he said, yeah, hi. I go, what are you doing? How are you? He says, I'm doing all right. I'm doing good. Yeah, how are you? I'm like, all right. I didn't ask him where he was going. I didn't ask him what he was doing. But he was completely out of character.
Cool.
He was like dressed like he was from the tropical islands. He had his wife. He looked impeccable. And I was just like, we don't know until we don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea what he was doing in Midtown Manhattan. I have no idea why he was dressed that way. I didn't ask any questions, but it was him. And I never forgot that. I'm like, what are you doing here? I didn't even say that. I was like, how are you?
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. And there he is. He just walked up. I go, there's an industrial legend just walking down the street.
Cool. That's awesome.
There's Zev.
Yeah.
It didn't look anything like you would expect. Nothing. And I'm like, that blew my mind.
That's
it
awesome.
just stayed in my brain. Yeah, it just blew. So Zev, Monty Gazzazza, Boyd Rice, the earliest stuff, Cabaret Voltaire.
Yeah.
There's several other things too. There was a guy named, I forget his name as an artist, but he went under the title Police Band, and he did 1 7-inch, and he used a like a police band radio, and it was mostly vocal sounds, and with some other stuff underneath it, and it was a little bit of like almost like crime stuff. So it would be like almost like police crime announcement with like this sort of weird droning underneath it. And it just like, I forget his name, and he used to play a violin too. And then I saw him in a magazine or book called Semiotext, which was a really great book, compendium of lots of different like postmodern, post-structuralist art theory and stuff. And he was in it. And I'm like, wow, this guy's really fascinating. So there's a lot of these one-offs. There was a project called Men Eject. And then there was Minimal Man, Patrick Miller. And once again, it had like a nervous gender and like a lot of sort of like kind of musical punk-oriented band stuff that spoke directly to me.
Cool.
And then like later on, it would be like from Italy, I like the Sodality.
Yep.
The Sodality.
Hell yeah.
I really love the Sodality. MB, stuff like that. Murder Corporation, stuff like that. Some of the Japan stuff.
Yeah.
Early on. And then there's a lot of no-wave artists that don't fit into anything, like maybe I like Bronker's early stuff. And, you know, but I never tried to mimic that stuff because I really thought a lot of it was just way, you would really have to like to have the discipline as a musician to continue doing it.
What about,
and then there's just like,
what about a handful of newer artists that you're into? I mean, maybe of the past 5 or 10 years that you're really
there's so many
impressed with.
I'm going to be wrong.
Sorry?
Yeah, you see, like if I leave someone out, then I'm going to feel bad because like,
well, just
I don't want to like leave someone out who was super great and then say, well, you know, so you got me on the spot with that.
People can know the disclaimer that this is just a small handful. Let's limit it to 5. It's not exclusive. It's not the top 5. It's just 5.
Oh, I tell you what I was really, really impressed with. I'll give you one.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about these artists, but Sam sent me a CD by a artist named Commuter.
Yes. Commuter, yeah. That's a really good CD that's been getting a lot of praise, like universal praise from along the board. And that's cool that, it's coming from you too, like a legend who doesn't maybe know who the guy is, but like you picked that up. That's a really good one. That's a guy named Jackson, who also has a power electronics product called Herocrat, but this is kind of his side project that's more, it's based around the field recordings from, the streets and really harsh industrial noise. Yeah, that's a good one. That's very good. Sam blessed me with a lot of his releases, and when I put that one on, this one really was above the cusp because just the feeling, the street was there. Yeah. And photographs and just the whole layout of this thing. And Sam and the artist and everyone Grant, if he mixed it, they did a brilliant job. I mean, like I really felt like I'm in the street. Yeah. This is dark. This is real because went out there. Yeah, he actually said he was being followed by someone while he was recording. Yeah. At one point, so he was doing his pre-recordings, and one of the homeless or something followed him a little bit. So I really like that. Yeah. I like that element that he went out there and and I'm not big into field recordings because I think a lot of them are just sort of whatever sounds. You can go outside and listen to sounds all day, right? Yeah. But like if you could really tone in, it's almost like a photographer. Like you've got your entire eyes, but a photographer takes one snapshot of something and details, captures that. And I think that's what this is. It's more like this is like sonic photography. This is full photography. It's deep. I really like that. Yeah. There's a project called Regosphere. Yeah. Regosphere? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. When I heard that, once again, it's on Sam's label. So maybe I listened to it and I'm like, pretty impressive. Yeah. There's a lot of different things going on in there. It's very, it's got
this, and it's got very decent textures
Yeah.
in there. I would love. Oh, I also like, once again, because maybe he's my pal, I like David Reed stuff. I think David Reed is phenomenal.
Yep.
I see in my brain, because sometimes I live in a fantasy world, I see David Reed doing soundtracks.
Yeah.
I watched the first 48, this crime drama, like real crime drama.
Yeah.
And all of it is this sort of ambience, sort of like ambient swells and drums.
Yeah.
And I said, if he only had the right connections, he could be creating all sorts of like ambient textures for like anything crime series. There's a guy named PBK.
Yeah.
Philip Klinger.
Yeah.
He's been there for a long, long time, and he's collaborated with many, many, many people.
Yep.
He is a musician. He gets down. He's in there.
For sure.
When I like some of his stuff more than others, but the fact is that he actually is in there doing stuff.
Yep.
There was a guy named Gregory Whitehead who did a lot of like almost like spoken word stuff. He used the voice a lot and like language.
Okay.
Like, a lot of times, like, almost stuff like black humor, and I'd see even the haters.
Yeah.
There's a sort of black humor haters thing. Like they're using text language in a very unique and tricking it out, and it's not pleasant. It's not like, oh, this is funny stuff. It's funny, but it's like there's also some sort of like push against what language text meaning is.
Sure.
And it sort of plays on this different level. So things like that are very interesting.
Yeah.
And then there's just like a whole swath of like power electronics.
Yeah. But that's a good unique 5. So that's a good unique 5. That's great. But I want to ask you what you would like to add and tell folks that that I haven't asked you about, or that you didn't have a chance to yet. Anything you'd like to let people know of before we sign off?
I think we covered everything. I mean, I talked about myself a lot, which is something that I don't really like to do.
That's what we're here for.
We do it all. Well, we talk about ourselves, but I really want to talk about, like, once again, the road of life, how we live our lives, what happens, our encounters, our experiences. These are meaningful.
Yeah.
Whether you promote them as art or music, or they're just private moments between you and yourself or your higher power, whatever you got. But the thing is that your experiences count. Your experiences count. And if you share them through the medium of art and music, you're connecting and you're bridging a gap that if you do it for yourself, fine, but also think about that you're doing it maybe for someone else. Like, this is an open letter to you, whoever you are. And always keep that open. Always keep the idea that someone somewhere out there may love what you do, may connect with that.
Yeah.
Many other people might say, I don't like this, or shut it off, or whatever, but there's always that one person out there that's going to say, wow, that really touched me. Most of the time it's in other forms of music, like folk music.
Sure.
Folk music leans directly into, like, I feel sorry for me, or whatever, at the bridge that we set, and it's beautiful. My girlfriend was deeply into folk scene here in LA. So I've listened to a lot of folk music, and, but sometimes, you want to go the other direction, and go real hard.
Yeah.
Even if it's not hard, it's just different. And to me, folk music, world music, private music, if you share it, if you present it to someone, like if you have a diary and you never show it to anyone and they find it when you're dead, that's one thing. But if you say, okay, here's some of my notes, and you put it out there, the whole fanzine world where people are just notes, and you think, well, this is just rambling mumbo jumbo. But if you read it, you got to understand this is someone's experiences. So I always give a little bit of that, give a little time to, like, read it. I may not like it. I may not agree with it. I may think this is juvenile, or I'm not a judge. I'll read it, and I read it, and then maybe I collected it for years. It would go on shelves, and boxes of it. I don't have it anymore. But the thing is that what I'm trying to say it again, open yourself up, do a project, get out there, meet people, meet friends. There's a whole world of people. I think that the noise experimental people, without the weird fuzzy politics that, get at shows or whatever, that they're the most deeply committed, honest, sincere people that you will ever meet doing any sort of collective noise art anywhere. Some have agendas, some want to make money, some want to be legends, but most are just there doing art for art's sake, expressing themselves. And like I said, it's so much better than shooting a needle in your arm, shooting a gun at someone, or fighting. Put it into the music and be at peace and go, man, go.
Yeah.
I know I sound hippie now, but God, man, this is such a fucking world, man.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to do.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, I want to thank my love, Darby Southgate, the author of this book, and who saw me. She met me on Facebook, actually, and we share a lot of commonalities, and she took a complete, risk or chance on a stranger. And she saw me in Austin. I'd just gone through a divorce, and she saw all this. She had no idea just how deeply involved I was in the noise scene.
Sure.
I was just somebody. And she came out to Austin, and she met me, and then I came out to LA, where I was my second home for years, and I was just like, okay. And then we got together, we fell in love, and it was a miracle because I was at the lowest ebb. I had lost my wife. I had lost my entire collection of stuff.
Yeah.
Because, there was black mold, and then there was bed bugs, and I was having fights with the management, and they were going to evict me, and I was making very little money at the job. I couldn't move.
Yeah.
So it was a disaster. So I decided to take everything and throw it away, which meant everything, including family photos, everything.
Wow.
I didn't think I was going to live. I really was thinking about committing suicide. I was like, I'm at the end of my life here. So I threw everything away, but she found me, and she is the love of my life, and she's in the next room, and I love her, and
cool.
This is what I live my life here.
Great.
And Hal Hutchinson and Cy Clark from Bunker.
Yep.
I met Hal through he got in touch with Chris Yustinich, and then Chris said, I don't know this guy. He's talking about Final Solution. I don't know what he wants. What does he want? I go, I don't know what he wants. And he said, I found the tapes, and I want to put them out. And I said, oh, man, that's great. I've heard about you. I know about you in the UK. And then when Darby and I went over to London, we met him. We met him inside.
Cool.
And we met David Lloyd Jones, which I want to say hi to. And he's wonderful people, just wonderful.
Yeah.
We spent some time together, and we talked, and we laughed, and we chatted, and it was great. Yeah. And so Hal Hutchinson, Cy Clark, David Lloyd Jones, The Bunker, Steve Davis from Love Earth Music, who is a longtime friend of mine, Jason from Chrome Peeler, who him and Dominic put out, re-released our first demo tape and didn't into obscurity. Rusty Kelly, who joined Final Solution, was a good friend of me in Austin. Jay Howard, that I work with in Bacteria Field. Bacteria Cult. Jacob from Bacteria Field, who was a friend, and I did a tape with him called Psycho Ex-Girlfriend. Right. And we were supposed to do a part 2, but it never came to politics because, it's just weird. But he had another great tape of a Psycho Ex-Girlfriend going off on a voicemail, but he didn't want to use it. He didn't want to get involved because he knew the people. They were kind of involved. He's like, shh. But there might be another part 2 of the Psycho Ex-Girlfriend, so we'll put that out there. Henry Mallard. John Grimaldi from Detachment Programs. Jesse Bolash. Jesse Bolash is a young kid. He lives in Erie, Pennsylvania. He put out the first Walmart tape.
Cool.
He's a skater. He has a project called Dagger. And he's a harsh noise wall kid, and he's just a great guy. Of course, Sam and Grant, Sam Stockton and Grant. They're the dynamic duo. They just have the passion of putting this music out on its level. They're totally respectful of the music. They understand. They put out the whole range of stuff, even stuff like Kofor, Kofor stuff. That's, not for Kofor. Am I saying it right? Kofor.
Yes. Kufar, I think.
Right, which is like he's a little bit confrontational if you listen to some of this.
Sure.
like, but they get it.
Yeah.
They get it. They don't say no. They
Yeah.
say yes.
Right.
The possibility of all this music.
Yeah.
So those two.
Yep.
Okay. Jim Harris.
Yep.
From Rusty Comp. Tim Birkland from Imploding Sounds. He's got a new label out. He's putting out a Walmart cassette. Roger from Brighter Death Now.
Yep.
Mika. Let me see who else. Kirk Kelly, who I work with in Carried Emptor.
Yep.
Michael Contreras.
Yes.
Contreras, who's been doing his work and Death Squad and then his own personal stuff for years.
Yep.
That public access radio, the TV show, wonderful.
Yep. Great guy.
Paul Bearer from Sheer Terror, the lead singer of Sheer Terror, who's had that the hardcore band Sheer Terror for years.
Yep.
Paul, Sheer Terror, Ron from the Nihilistics, those two bands together are basically, to me, the heart and soul of New York hardcore.
Yeah.
There were bigger bands, there are more known bands, but if you really want to get to heart and soul, it's Ron the Nihilistics, and Sheer Terror. Those two need to be thanked.
Yep.
My friend Ditto, who was in the scene, good friend Sean Madem, I brought him into the noise scene for a while. He was fascinated. He started to build instruments and do all sorts of stuff. And then because of life situations, he bowed out.
Yeah.
He said, you know what? Now he lives in the desert near Yucca Valley. He doesn't do noise.
Yeah.
He's got the gear. It's in the garage. But you know what? Brought him in. He understood it. He did it. And then he passed. And that's an interesting thing. Some people bow out.
Yeah.
They just bow out gracefully.
That's okay.
They phase right through it. So let's see. Who else do I want to thank here? We're getting to the end here. Let's see. Of course, Mike from Condom.
Yeah.
Mike from Condom for holding on to tapes for years and understanding what we're doing. Yeah. So Mike from Condom, Dom for now from Hospital. Okay. I met him, and when we met maybe 2 or 3 times when he still had the Hospital Gallery record store.
Yep.
Wonderful guy, funny as hell.
Yep.
Great sense of humor. He's amazingly funny. He's a very charismatic guy.
Yep.
Adrian, who does Obfuscated Records.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a little known project called Pulsating Cyst.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually my kind of sort of brother-in-law for a little while when I was married.
Okay.
His wife, Katie, it's the kind of interrelational there. And they met because of us, and he got married, and he's happy. And he does a lot of really interesting stuff.
Cool.
Mike Finklia, Mike Finklia from Serrations and Nefarious Activities. I met him in Sacramento, and he didn't know who I was. So we were talking for a while, and he, was like, hey, I said, we're talking about that. I was like, yeah, I used to do kind of like power electronic stuff years ago. He goes, I was in the band Final Solution. He's like, oh, and he did a great interview with me about a year later for his fanzine. Yeah. And and I did it on tape. So he gave me the questions, and I would just have this tape recorder running, and I just did it.
Oh,
and
cool.
Since I have a very New York voice, I was just like, so I told all these stories, and he was, once again, he was very helpful to us, and he gets what we do, and I appreciate his music a lot. The last few, honestly, Les Plesko, who's no longer with us, he was my sponsor. He was my 12-step sponsor. Okay. He was a writer. He was a novelist. He's put out 2 books. He was a teacher at UCLA, and he was a great human being. Yeah. And he taught me how to calm down. Yeah. And to understand that everything I said, he basically said, when you write, you share. Yeah. When you share, it's a gift. Yeah. And others are giving you gifts too. So accept gifts, do not deny them. Yeah. Do that. And he taught me that because I was raw when I came out here. Yeah. My brother Peter, he was a little kid, and then when I had the big mix up with my family and I had to get out of there, I left him behind. Actually, I left it with my stepfather, which it's fine. That's his dad and everything. I didn't get along with my stepfather at all, and he had to grow up with him. And then he got involved with hip hop. Yeah. He does these hip hop. He's got his own little band camp, and he keeps active. And it took years and years before we actually got together and, kind of like talk about the past.
Yeah.
I should have been there more for him. I was too busy running around in the streets, but I could have came over and threw a football with him. And, it's just hard stuff.
Yeah.
But it's part of, it's really, all of this is real part of like how I get to where I get, with how I get. It's just like, you got to get it out there. And of course, Greg Scott and Chris Yustinich, that were basically my brothers and my friends, and I missed them. Yeah. And I'm very sad that it came to suicide. Yeah. And I just wanted happiness. I just wanted to have a fun time. Yeah. I wanted fun. And and those things, I love them, and I just wanted them to be happy. Even, like I said, if we never did anything again, as long as they're out there doing their thing. But I had a chance to meet them. I had a chance to hang out with them, create with them. And it inspired me. Yeah. It they're with me in the music, and they're not forgotten. And I can't speak much for the dead, except all I wish is that if they would have hung on just one more day, just make it a little better. I've been at that point. I've been at the point where I've had enough. And that's a very personal space. Yeah. This music that we have allows those feelings to come out. Yeah. And then hopefully you can be at peace. I have a lot of faith in the music, and I have a lot of faith in everything. And they were there, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without them. Yeah. Period. And so I leave you with that.
Well, may they rest in peace.
Thank your friends. Be grateful for your friends.
Yeah.
And then just catch up with them and say, hey, just let them know that they're on your mind somewhere. Because
definitely, that's a good reminder that we all need to remember and just feel. Yeah. But you can feel proud that you're keeping them. You can feel proud that you're keeping their legacy alive, and you really are.
And put down resentment. We can get all bunched up and say, you know what, fuck you, man, and I hate this dude, and that dude is a fucking show off, and that dude's a phony, and like that's me being Mr. Judge, Jury, and Executioner. And the thing is that I have to put that down every day and say, do not have a fault-finding mind. Look at yourself, bro. Do your thing. Yeah. And live and let live. And bless these people, because whether they're doing noise or nonsense, it doesn't matter. You're not the judge of it. Yeah. Accept it. If you don't like it, and if you don't like certain people, avoid them. Right. That's all. Just avoid them. If you don't like me, I don't like you. Hey, walk on the other side of the street. Yeah. But don't get involved with them. And I got to learn that for myself. Yeah. If anyone's out there struggling with the fisticuffs of life, put it down, because it ain't going to get any more.
Yeah. That's right. All right, Eddie, really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was super to talk to you, super to get to know you. And we'll talk soon. Take care.
Anytime, and thank you. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to White Centipede Noise Podcast. Please head over to patreon.com/White Centipede Noise to support this show. Extra special thank you to John Ingman, Tony Stovic, and DF, heavy sponsors of White Centipede Noise Podcast.